Well, thank you. And we're starting close to on time because we have a group of people joining us. We are zooming out across these United States today. So you guys are all live. So be careful what you say. It's being recorded.
Yeah, that's more like you be careful.
Yeah, they said that you're very, very, very correct. And a fine good morning and welcome. As the comedians say, it's always good to be in Oaks, North Dakota, especially if it is 1 below zero. It was interesting. Somebody sent me something yesterday. It was a meme. It said, if you have a UFO, and I've identified it as a UFO, it's not a UFO anymore, it's an FO. And if it lands, it's just a no. So keep that in mind as you go through your day, a little philosophy to start your agronomics. Well, for those of you who are new, how many newbies do we have? All right, there's a few hands, good. Welcome. And we are actually excited to be up here. We're finding out that the economics are driving people to ask questions and do things in a different fashion than they might have done in the past. And so we are excited to give you an opportunity to look at things a little differently. I was looking back there this morning for something to make the point, and I grabbed this thing. And actually, the lights are coming on now. They sat outside all night at below zero, and the batteries weren't any good. So the light is kind of dim, which is actually good because sometimes when you come to a meeting, the lights do go on, but they stay dim for a while. So get the point here. And I think this is one of the things that we're, again, excited about. There are a number of alternative methods now being explored to what we would call traditional farming. And folks, there's not a thing wrong with traditional farming, right? It brought us, every one of us here today. And as we have started to explore all the new and unique opportunities that are out there, efficiency has always been the driving factor of American agriculture, and it still is. And we are all keenly aware of that. So what we're going to be exploring today is different things that increase efficiency. And as complicated as it might seem, that's really all it's about. Another thing is, especially for those guys who are here for the first time, you're going to hear a lot of stuff today. And my objective is to help you connect the dots. Please don't think as we're going through this that you're expected to put all this stuff in your head, go home, memorize it, and try to regurgitate it and think about it. That's not the objective. The objective is to see where agronomy is supposed to be at and crop nutrition is supposed to be working from the way it should be. And by the way it should be, we're talking about what does science in some cases really say? What does research show us? So I always start out the meetings with this point of view. What is agronomy? Agronomy is the study of soils and plants and how they interact to optimize production. We have a world that we live in today, it's nearly 2025. And I've asked the question several times in the last few meetings. We've studied fertilizers and fertilizer applications for more than 80 years. If there was a direct correlation to the yield on your farm to a number on these magical sheets that we call soil tests, it's 2025. Research at the highest level, chemistry that shows no zero anymore. They can measure 10 or more places below the decimal point. If there was a number that made your crop X, don't you think you'd read about it on the front page, the middle page, and the back page of every single publication that anyone who had that information could get their hands on? Now that scares some people, and it reinforces others, because we've spent our lives in some cases and our livelihood chasing those numbers. And I think that's what, in some cases, people get really unnerved or really relaxed about, because we spent our lives trying to help people realize that that's the case. It's not about the numbers for agronomy. It's about integrating the information to allow the agronomy to maximize. And that's sometimes hard to grasp. Because as farmers today, we want to be good, high quality, high level managers. We want to be. And so some of that time and effort that goes into trying to study agronomy, we push off to the side because we can't do it all. We've got all these other things to manage. I was listening to guys talk about motors this morning and blowing rods and pistons. It's all exciting stuff. But who really wants to talk about how many pounds or parts per million of boron do I have in my soil? Really not a high priority, but yet it should be. Because if you do the boron right, you save the money, get it in the right situation, it might make enough money to pay for all those repairs on the pistons. And I think this is where it's headed. Fertilizer companies finally are facing reality. We see ag tech funding coming back into the system, but ag tech funding is not, as part of the business, is not coming out towards dry fertilizer. It's headed for all these new alternative fertilizers. Alternative, a safe word, right? Mosaic, it's developing a pipeline of ag bioproducts. He said biologicals are crucial in the evolution of crop nutrition and will elevate potential in every field. General Mills, embarking on farmer-driven regenerative agriculture strategy. I listened to them. I sat in the General Mills offices and listened to them talk about what they want to do. And that's all well and good. Sadly, many of companies are out just checking boxes to make themselves look good. And they want to talk the talk, but they have to walk the walk. So it's interesting. What I've said is we've done this in this area for many, many years, but 25 to 30 years out here. And I ask people, are their offerings more like ours? Many of you have sat in here for more than 15 years. And you sit there and scratch your head about some of the stuff we talk about, some of the products. And yet the rest of the industry is doing what? The same thing. I'm one of those fortunate people who lived long enough to see their predictions come true. 25 years ago, when we got hard into this, I said, knowing what we know, one day you'll have to envelop microbiology, plant physiology, biochemistry, all the things that we really spent no time in our life trying to figure out, right? Because if that's the way nature works, life has to understand life. If you throw in things here that confuse life, life has no idea what to do with it. So the more life you infuse into a natural system, the more life comes out. So one of the reasons why, many of the modern pharmaceuticals can do some strange things, but if we load our systems up with strange pharmaceuticals, the body doesn't know what to do with it. It's hoping that the liver can break it down and kick it out. It has no idea what it is. And it's a similar situation that we do out in the field. So we realize that after 25 years, the prediction came true, and I'm one of those fortunate people who lived long enough to see it. Because that's exactly what we're experiencing today. And so it's no surprise that what we just shown in that couple of slides is reality. So the questions we should all be asking, we know that the soil is designed to feed the plant. We've spent our lifetime working it. Very few people have ever been told the plant is designed to feed the soil. 20 to 25% of the food that it makes, it moves out into the soil. 20 to 25%. Nature's a hard enough row to hoe anyway. Why would it waste that material? It's not wasting anything. It knows that biology in the soil is the communicator between itself, sending out signals, and dead sand, silt, and clay that has minerals in it. And the microbes produce the chemistry to melt down the sand, the silt, and clay and release the nutrients to the soil system. That's how the trees that are in the shelter belt, or a woods, if you had them up here, which very few, but in our part of the world, we have them. The side ditches, sometimes the fence rows, and if we pull them out and we farm over them, miraculous things seem to happen over all old fence rows. Why is that? Because the biological diversity that's been there for centuries is still there. And when those crops find new and different types of microbes that were standard many decades ago to communicate the signals back to the soil, lo and behold, the plant does better. And then all the extra organic matter that's still sitting there, that's been cycling through better root masses and everything else. Soil health is still in the fence row and the side ditch. So all of that makes sense. The plant is harvesting sunlight, as you can see, looking on the leaves here, harvesting sunlight and turning that into glucose sugar. It's a sugar machine. It lives and dies by its levels of sugars. So how can I help make this exchange work better, faster, more efficiently? Well, we know that fertilizer as a supplement helps the system. If it didn't, fertilizer applications wouldn't have ever worked at all. So we know that's the case. However, we focused in on 3 to 5 major elements over the years and forgot about the other 13 or 14 that are completely necessary as well. So we kept moving the P and K up a little higher with nitrogen and doing nothing for the micronutrients. And so the micronutrients were either staying here or typically falling down farther, so the gap got wider and wider. If we go out there and want to put on a lot of P and K because we're concerned that our P and K levels are low, but there's not enough micronutrients to support the system, all the extra P and K in the world doesn't do anything. And occasionally you might put something on and it might have been a good season weather-wise and the soil was happier and healthier, and maybe some of those micronutrients were released a little better, and it looked like you might have gotten a really nice return on investment from the P and K. But in some cases, it had nothing to do with the P and K. I spoke with a gentleman recently that put on loads and loads of potassium. When asked why, he said because the soil test levels were low and the person recommending fertilizer said it was a really great idea. And I looked at the sample and I'm like, oh my gosh. I said, have you ever used a pound of boron in your life? He said, no. And I said, sadly, this is an in-the-money bet. I said, we're talking somewhere between at least 20 to 30 bushels for $3.50 to $4 an acre. The potash costs somewhere in the vicinity of 85 to 95. But without the boron, the potash is way, way over its capabilities. It's not going to do anything. That's a sad reality in a day and age when we have all the information to fix that information, but we don't get it expressed well. And I keep talking about boron, but it's not just boron. This isn't a boron meeting. But we have that situation going all over the country, and we have been selling boron to growers all over the country now for years, and their farms get better and better and better. Why? Because the micronutrients are still down lower than they should be. So in a year when our macronutrients are costing us major dollars, we can pull away from that. It doesn't mean that you don't put fertilizer on. If you want to put fertilizer on, it's fine. Makes you sleep better. But you don't have to go out here and try to save the world to grow a great big huge crop on just P and K. And I think that's a hard lesson for us to grasp, because we don't want to be the guy that's ravaging the land, renting the farm and not putting back. We don't want to be that guy. I get that. But the dollars that we spend need to be dollars that make that land more useful to us, and when we're done with it, a better piece of ground for the person who owned it. And we all feel that, but we think if we just do it with the P and K, we'll be fine. And that mentality has got to start to be more limited, because it's those elements that are taking away our livelihood. They're going into someone else's pocket. They're building massive, massive institutions while we're out here struggling to figure out how to get a little more equipment, a little more grain handling, just a better situation. The people that we've dealt with in many cases now for many, many years have not felt that same pressure. And it's rewarding to see that. And a lot of times it doesn't happen overnight, but it is a very rewarding situation for them and us both. We should consider the environment the crops are expected to grow in, right? We have all these, at least one or two of these you've got to live with. Limited and restricted moisture, early cold planting and germination, sometimes low organic matter, sometimes too much organic matter, and biological activity within it. Intensive sunlight, intensive tillage, or long-term no-till, and even long-term no-till does present some interesting issues. Pesticide stress, and now, after the last several years of different weathering events, alkali and salt stress coming back. If it was really dry, the salt stress didn't seem to be too bad. Once we got lots and lots of rainfall, then it dried off, then the alkali returned. Here comes the salts. They come to the top, the water evaporates off, and it leaves the salts behind. So under these extreme conditions, what we have to do, if it's within our power, is to identify the opportunities we have and enable the crop to thrive, or at least strive to thrive through those conditions. Because if we understand that that plant lives and dies by the sugars within it, it burns sugar to fight stress. If we can keep those sugar burning systems down to a minimum, that little bit of extra sugar oftentimes is what gets them through that little bit of stress, and weather returns, and boom, they're off to the races, and they're ahead of the crowd. And they respond better for us. And many of you guys that have been in here have seen that through the years, not completely understanding what's going on. But at the end of the year, when you have more bushels, sounds like if you're listening to what's going on, it's like, wonder where those came from. Well, it comes from the implication of all these things. There's a number of things in a toolbox. If you get one of these booklets that we have here, you're going to look through a lot of different things, and there are a lot of different names. There are fertility products with some NPK like 725-5, that's high orthophosphate. There are stress relief products. There are micronutrient products. There are food sources. And I can't emphasize that enough. I keep telling people, and they're so surprised, I said, if you know anything that's alive on this planet, does it eat? They don't just magically sustain themselves. They have to eat. Do you eat? Sometimes it looks like you guys eat like 4 or 5 times a day. You know? Snacking all the way through. So what? Everything eats. Everything gets hungry. Is the soil alive? Well, the sand, silt, and clay, not so much, but all the stuff near the surface that's cycling and doing all the work with biology in it, sure it is. Worms, all kinds of stuff. The soil has to eat. Plants, well, they make their own food, Dan. Yeah, but you want it to do maximization of that, right? Yeah. Well, it's got to make more food, or it's got to get fed. Food sources are part of the secret to this success. All the nutrients in the world don't fix food. I've spoken to the crowd many times, and I said, when I take supplements in the morning, which I do because I know my nutrient efficiency is poor because I'm on the road all the time and I eat terribly. And I have to sit out at night with you guys, and they tip these bottles up, and it's like, oh my gosh. Not a lot of nutrients in there, a lot of carbohydrates, I suppose. But when we understand that supplements are designed to make systems improve, but they're not food, I've never taken that bottle and in the morning, like my stomach's growling, I'm like, oh, that'd be a good way to get rid of that growl, is just suck down the whole bottle. It doesn't work. And you know that because it's not food. So when we improve the food uptake and availability to the plants in the soils, they're invigorated. I guess that should be no surprise. Plants are designed to feed the soil, so they feed it food. But even in all that, with all that stuff that they've put into the soil, if you help them build more in the top, then the stuff that went to the soil is not leaning it down. It's keeping it kind of fat. And that's the whole point in this. Using these tools, how do we bridge the gap? Well, we have several things to pick from. And you can see there's the long list, the same list we saw before. And it's amazing how several of these things will attack and fix some of the problems. When we have limited and restricted moisture, I have a product called SG Engage, which Engage is a soil penetrant. It allows moisture to move into the soil. It can also help move some organic materials, like if you put a herbicide in, it needs to be incorporated. You can help incorporate that with these types of technologies. The beauty of it is it's a unique situation where if you think about the technology, it's like a sucker. You've got the ball on the top that's the sugar or the food stuff, and then you've got a stick that you're holding on to. Well, if you think about that, what's happening in soil when it gets wet, organic matter, lots of organic matter when it's dry, is what we call hydrophobic, water fearing. If you've ever had these situations up here, and I know you get into it from time to time, you go 2-3 weeks or more without rain and the surface dries off, it's kind of powdery. And then if you stood out there when there's a rain coming by, and if it starts early in the rain event and there's just kind of sprinkling a little bit, and you look down at the soil, and when the raindrops hit the soil, they puff. The soil sits there and puffs, puff, puff, puff. And if you look down real close, you see the rain hit the surface, and the raindrop is bouncing around. And you look at it closely, and it's covered with a really light film of material, which is soil, it's organic matter, but the organic matter isn't absorbing into the raindrop, it's out on the surface. So the water is actually not being accepted by the organic matter. If you think about that on a little different scale, if organic matter is covering your sand and your silt and your clay, as the water moves into the soil and it's moving by the soil particles with organic matter on the outside of it, and the water is being repelled, it's not going through the organic matter and into the sand, silt, and clay until everything kind of evens out a little bit, then it'll move in. If you take these products and you put them on the surface, what happens is the little sucker itself attaches to the organic matter, and the little stick sticks out, and it's attracting water. And because of the sucker being attached to the organic matter, the water is conducted through the stick and through the sucker and goes right into the organic matter and then goes on into the soil particle. So what it allows is water to move in more quickly, more efficiently, and spread out. And the more water you put in those little microparticles, the longer you harvest moisture in that cycle. And we have people all the time when we talk to them about sand, it's like, well, let's put a soil penetrant on the sand. Dan, it's sand. We get an inch of water, we're back on it in the afternoon. Why? Because the water moved quickly through the system. Why wouldn't you want it to move in and spread out? And more than likely, you'll still get on in the afternoon. But when it's all said and done, you got extra water in your sand. That doesn't make any sense to me. I get it. Just try it. And as people have tried that, they've been stunned, literally stunned. Planting and germination, you've got products that actually assist with energy accumulation and going and causing, actually the biology actually causes seeds to germinate that communicate across that cell wall, if you will, of the outside of the seed saying, hey, you've got starch in there. You let that starch come out to us, we'll feed you and take care of you. And the more biology that's around that seed, the quicker and easier it is for that seed to germinate. That's how important biology is in seed. So it's one of the reasons why we have a product called Originate, which is a seed treatment. So when you put the seed treatment on the seed, it doesn't cause the seed to germinate because there's not enough water and other information. But once it gets in the soil, just like that, it's like, hey, it's time to go. Wake up. Here we go. And we see better germination. We have products like Assist that are loaded with sugars, fulvic acid, some other energy sources, and a few other pieces. And Complement, which is the group of microorganisms that are specifically designed to help that soil become more biodiverse. Lots more different types of microbes to be able to encourage the development and improve the communication. We can do that with low organic matter and biological activity. It makes sense as you start to think about it. We can do it in intensive sunlight. If you have micronutrients in the system especially, you can actually, where sunlight that's intense makes what we call free radicals, little chemical things going around kind of blasting cells. Well, antioxidants, if you've heard those terms even on TV, talking about even human biology, antioxidants take free radicals and calm them down, tear them apart, and they don't do damage. So there's all kinds of things you can do to make intensive sunlight be more efficient to the plant. And the more sunlight it gets, the more sugar it makes. And the more sugar it makes, the less water it needs to finish its cycle. That will throw you, because we're under the impression that corn and soybeans and wheat, they're fertilizer suckers and water dependent to a massive level. And yet, how many times have we been through decent seasons with moisture limiting, cool summer nights, and absolutely stunned at the end effect? We didn't have enough water this year to make that crop. That crop's outstanding. Test weight's good. Yield for what we had is tremendous. How could that happen? And yet, we laugh when we say, if plants had less water, in some cases, they could make more food. If a plant is a sugar machine, and it's dependent upon its levels of sugar, and you have lots of rain, what's going to happen to the plant if it doesn't get rid of the water? In the soil, what's going to happen to it? It's going to die. The root's going to be asphyxiated. It's going to kill it. So the plant turns on the pump machine, says, we got to help get rid of this water, and it pulls in the water and evaporates it through its leaves. But when it pulls in the water, what does it do to the sugar? Think. Anybody want to answer that? What does it do to the sugar? It dilutes it. And when it dilutes it, if it does it too long and too wrong, it can't yield the same. The whole adage that rain makes grain is right, but too much rain doesn't make more grain, it makes less grain. You've all seen that. Think back at certain years and be like, oh my gosh. So there is a fine line between enough rain and too much rain. If you put salt in that plant, if you were to suck up salt, lots and lots of salt, have you ever experienced that? I did one time in college. I got too much salt from a pretzel bag. I got down to the bottom of the pretzel bag and I was still hungry, so I just ate the salt. That was when I was a freshman in college. Still pretty stupid. Didn't take me long. About 5 minutes later, I'm like, what is going on? I'm going to throw up. All of a sudden, it's like, uh-oh. You ever heard the dose determines the poison? Didn't realize that I had overtoxified myself with too much salt. I ran down to the restroom and I'm sucking in the water to make sure. Now, sure enough, I diluted that down. If you fill your plants with too much salted fertilizer, because it's a choice they get when you put it out there, if they suck in too much salt, the only way to keep the salt at bay is to draw in what? Water. So if it's too much salt and it's the wrong types of salt and you suck in that material and you bring in water, what did you do to the sugar? You just diluted it. You see how this thing, it doesn't mean that things are completely wrong. Look, we haven't done things completely wrong or we wouldn't be sitting in here today. It's just that when we start talking about the fine lines of 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 more bushels an acre, we have to be careful how we're trying to achieve that, because if we upset the balance, it's not going to work in our favor. And people are now only beginning to realize that, especially ironically, as we drop the soil test levels, which sounds like, oh my gosh, that's a kiss of death. That's not been my experience. And many of you here have experienced that yourself. It's like, look, it's not such a bad thing to save a little money and let some soil test levels come down. Because if we can bring P and K down and bring micronutrients up, and the yield begins to pop and do nicely, then we can actually go back in and put everything in and draw it to a new level. And that's where higher yield potential can come from. When people, it's funny because I remember when I first started coming up here and we used to joke about 200 bushel corn. And there's a lot of people that have achieved 200 bushel corn. Now, as an agronomist, knowing what I know about doing things around the world, it's very, very, in a sense, easy with a basic program to get 200 bushel corn, especially with improved breeding we've had the last few years. I don't ever worry about putting in too much, recommending any dry P and K in that yield range. But man, if you start busting it and you're 225, you're 230, you're 240, you're 250, and you're getting that consistently, now we need to have a different discussion. For the people that want to grow 300 bushel corn in the parts of the world where they do it, and they're practicing to do it, we do bring that up. But oftentimes we don't do it with dry P and K, we do it with manure. And my guys that have been with us for years and years, in some cases 25 years with manure, they don't have, believe it or not, any difficulty getting 280 plus bushel averages. Not just seeing it on the yield monitor, averages. Those are the only people that I've worked with for a long time that achieve that, because they have started to learn that it's not always the nutrients that are the limiting factor. It's the food. And what, even though it's ironic I would say this, what is the most prevalent thing in manure? Food. I don't think we'd want to think that too seriously. But for the soil and the soil system and the plant, all that organic carbon in the manure, which is a huge portion of it other than the water, is food for the soil system. So we're taking pieces of this and implementing it, even in long-term tillage and long-term no-till, where we use these products, we get bigger root masses, and the more root masses we get, the more organic matter gets laid down. As we see pesticide stresses, sometimes they're chelators, which means they tie up nutrition inside of a plant. So we use things to be able to get the plant higher energy, a few more micronutrients, a lot more biology. And then we go to alkali and salt stress, which we can talk about a little bit later. We take hydrate R, which is a concentrated, highly concentrated fulvic acid with some other pieces in it, along with some other fulvic acid, and we absorb the salt like into a sponge, If we can make it move, which hydrate will, and so will fulvic, if we can get water and make it move down and get rid of it, that's great. If it's up on top and we can't get rid of it, we soak it up on a sponge, which is the fulvic acid, humic acids, things that we've had for a number of years. All right, let's talk about phosphate. So we're talking about 725-5, orthophosphate. Plants only take the orthophosphate form up. That's it. All right. 90% of phosphate must be made available through biological activity. Even the universities have started saying that. It's like most of it just came recently through some biological activity. And I'll explain that to you here in a few minutes. Roots have 10 times more sites for orthophosphate uptake on them than any other nutrient. That is a statement. That is a realism. That is extremely important. Why? Because a plant is an energy conversion machine. It's got to make and store and move energy around. What causes that to happen in a plant? Phosphate. There's a whole lot of fancy biochemical reactions that we're not going to get into today that are completely phosphate dependent. If you're an energy conversion machine, you want to work with anything that makes energy efficiency better. And the number one thing for a plant is orthophosphate. This is why throughout the years, unknowingly, even with the people who were doing research on nutrients, they wanted to get phosphate higher. It seemed like the higher they got phosphate levels, the more efficient the system became, up to a point. And then it just didn't do anything anymore because you'd already met certain needs. But the plant, knowing that they needed this, they said, well, let's just get the phosphate levels and keep going. And it worked. And of course, guys that have manure, they can get the phosphate levels up fast. And so when they put the manure on, they get these really nice responses to the manure. And they're assuming that 90% of it's coming from NPK and all the other nutrients. But in the manure, you provided the phosphorus along with what? Food. And that's what I'm saying. It's like if you see these things, it's like, wow, once you get enough facts, just the facts, ma'am. Just the facts. Once you get enough facts, you start looking, it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. This is starting to make some different sense. Cool soils suppress biology and natural P release. You see a good percentage of the beneficial microbes in the soil, they actually respond from that signal from the plant that says, I need phosphate. And they send a signal back. We're receiving you loud and clear. You send us some sugars through these roots. We will replicate ourselves every 5 to 20 minutes. They double their population, and we will melt you phosphate like candy. That goes on all the time, all year long. Where are those microbes located? Are they located clear over here, 16, 18 inches away from this root? No, you're going to see in a picture in a little while. They're intimately related right there all over every part of the root, down to the smallest of roots, and slightly inside the root, inside the plant. So they're working right where that plant, where all of those sites are, to suck it up. So it's like, well, wait a minute. If I put orthophosphate in the furrow and the seed germinates and sends out roots, have you ever dug in your starter and it's like, hey, look, this root's running the furrow? Well, why would you think it would do that? Because if there's orthophosphate scattered along the furrow, plant's smart enough to go get it. And it puts all kinds of roots there. It's fascinating. I was telling people yesterday, I took pictures up in New Hampshire years ago. My wife and I went up to New Hampshire to the mountains. Granite everywhere. Trees growing all over the granite. And right up on top, I found this granite outcropping that had some big spruces on it. And it had a root that was every bit of, 2 inches, 3 inches wide, with all kinds of little secondary and third level and little tiny hair roots coming off of it. And this is a big tree, an old tree. And you look across the top of the granite, and the roots are growing in a curve. I said, do you suppose when that tree germinated, it was smart enough to know to go run the curve? Was that curve there when the tree germinated? The roots are right across the top of that granite. And the acids, because pine trees spruce trees, evergreens make lots of acids, right? The acids that come from that tree coming out of those roots had melted the groove in the granite. If you don't believe that, I can't help you. But that's the way it works. I took pictures of, in Montana, hundreds and hundreds of spruce and firs and pines growing on the top of a mountain, 8 inches of black organic matter on top of solid rock. And it's supporting these 100-foot trees everywhere. And I asked people at a meeting one day, how'd that happen? Well, there must be a fertilizer line down there somewhere because those trees couldn't survive otherwise. I'm like, interesting thought, and I don't buy it. Because that organic matter level just kind of gets to a certain point. It gets deeper and deeper at a point, and then it just kind of maintains itself because there's enough other biological stuff in there to physically melt rock. Granite dust has been used as a fertilizer and organic fertilizers forever, but without biology to help that dust break down, it doesn't do anything. You could spread it all over a soil. It's like brand new soil. It's like, oh, this doesn't have any infection in it. It's all brand new organic soil. And if it doesn't have any biology in it, you put it out there and you spread the dust, nothing happens. But you spray biology right over the top of that, boom, just like that, things take off. That's what we're talking about. 725-5 provides that in a safe, available form. It's low salt. Enhanced rooting leads to more feeding points and additional uptake from the applied stored forms because when the plants find those rich spots, they fill it with roots. High net increase in the phosphate efficiency and utilization because it's the right form and it's low salt. And if you put food with it, that plant takes off like a rocket. It will have massive root systems underneath it. The top may not be as impressive in some cases as you'd like, and sometimes it's fantastically better. You just don't know depending on the conditions. But it's very safe and it's even effective as a foliar product. Because we now know, especially with orthophosphate, especially if we put sugar in it and we put it on foliar, it will absorb through. For years and years, the university said, oh, plants don't absorb orthophosphate. They don't absorb phosphate. Well, they weren't even using orthophosphate products. All kinds of other things except that. And now we know that. We see, because if it didn't, we can put it on today, go out tomorrow and dig up in the roots and find all kinds of brand new roots. And then the place side by side, there's no new roots over here, but new roots here. Only a couple things could have caused that to happen if we treated it yesterday and there's new roots today. The 1-2 punch, 725-5 plus SG Assist or Complement. Assist has a whole host of different things in it. Complement is the straight microbes by itself, straight microbes. 725-5 is immediately available. This is an 80% orthophosphate product with 20% poly. Poly has to be broken down. They're interlocked chains. Poly has to be broken down to be turned into ortho. So what that does is that gives you immediate stuff, and then it allows you to keep getting it over time. The SG Assist, or the complement, which contains the biology and some foods, increases the rooting and makes soil phosphate and micronutrients available to the plants. Just like microbes that get the signal for phosphate, help release phosphate, there are signals for micronutrients. And they send out signals, and when the microbes hear that signal, they send a signal back. Oh, you need some manganese? Yeah, we're manganese releasers over here. Send us sugars, and we'll send you manganese. And that's how it works. It's sustainable in nature through the communication between the plant and the biology. As you till through the years, and you put more and more air in the soil, there are certain microbes that take advantage of that air. They eat up the organic matter, and they become the ones that rule. And the ones that are really important in some cases that have very highly specialized situations, they can't survive in low available food sources. So as the organic matter fell a little bit, you started limiting that diversity. And just because you put a little more food back in it, some of them got down to the point where they don't repopulate very well. And so that's why I even told people, I said, if you want to see something interesting, go get some soil from your fence row or your side ditch and put it in a bucket and get yourself a red Solo cup and go out once you've planted and put a few spots near the rows where that stuff, you can pour it in with a cup and move around. If you put a flag there, you know where to go back and look. But once the crop comes up and that soil's been around it for a little while, you won't need the flag anymore. You'll be able to see those plants. You can do those tests on your own farm to see whether or not I'm telling you the truth or not. It's fascinating what things can actually happen even when you play your own scientist. High nutrient levels early in the season. They increase sugar content. Those people who are in the room that might have animals, once you start realizing if you grow crops like this for forage or silage or grain, the cattle do way better on it. They don't need as much to eat. They leave stuff behind in the bunkers for the first time. I had a guy tell me something was wrong with my whole operation. I walked out one night and something was wrong. I didn't know what it was. And then I realized there was still feed in the bunkers. The cows were laying on the ground and they were happy and they weren't bawling anymore. That's what was missing, was all the bawling from the animals, because they'd eat up everything before and still hungry. And we started making the forage different, the food different, and the cattle settled down. Allow more energy to grow and fight stresses. Higher sugar levels and increase that ability to fight the stress and increase yield potential of plants. We're learning more and more about all plants, but all grasses we know set their yield in the first 30 active growing days with heat units. So all grains, so barley, wheat, sorghum, corn, all of those grasses set their yield when they're very, very young. Corn, we know by V3 has already set the number of rows around, and by V5, it's already set the length long. So early available, not just total, available fertility sets the yield potential higher, when we've seen that through decades of work. When soil micronutrients are deficient, SG multi-chelate micronutrients plus SG assist or complement drastically improves the uptake and utilization over the season. Multi-chelates. You've heard of, if you go out and buy the 9% zinc. Most times when you buy 9% zinc, it's EDTA chelated, which is perfectly fine. Good old technology, has worked for years, has kept things cost effective. And so what we've done now in the last several years, and we're doing it more effectively now because the products are getting less costly, is we're taking multiple chelates and putting them into these, and it's improving the uptake. We use amino acids. You might have heard that. Probably don't understand what amino acids are. One of the words of life. You've got sugars or carbohydrates. Take a sugar and marry some nitrogen on it. That's an amino acid. Take amino acids and train them together to each other, and that makes a protein. And take proteins and chain them together in some of these really highly complicated and fancy formulations and configurations. They call those enzymes. So you build from basic carbon, from carbon dioxide from the air into sugars, and you build all the way up through this complex system that actually tells life what to do. Enzymes tell life what to do. They say make things up or tear things apart inside the biological and physiological nature of anything that's alive. The most complex things on the face of the planet, enzymes. Those all have to work. And on those enzymes, when you make them, they have to have micronutrients stuck in very specific places to make the enzymes work. If they're not there, they don't function. So you spend all this time and help and information to build up these fancy enzymes, and without the right micronutrients, they don't even work. So we buy the nutrients to make sure, and we go back to that idea that the supplements are there. That's why the micronutrients can have such an impact. If they're there at low levels and we got all this macronutrient but not enough micros, we do all this fancy work and we're chasing our tail. So it's exciting and frustrating at the same time. Putting it in action. How do we do this? We talk about on-seed starters. Because on-seed starters, if you understand now why it's important to make sure that things are taken care of early, this fixes a large part of the problem, especially in soils that are either challenged, marginal, oftentimes not so much on the perfect soils, because perfect soils have some other things built into them that make them that way. But we can take very, very high quantities of marginal soils, which happens on most every farm, because not everybody gets all the good stuff, and even trying to get the good stuff, you know how much that can cost you. We take 725-5, put it out at 3 to 5 gallons to the acre with the orthophosphate that's available now. Low salt and seed safe, the right form for early season placement. We can take complement, the microbiology, put it in there at a pint per acre. You can take MicroStart zinc, which again, zinc on grasses, extremely important. Water management, photosynthesis, several things. If zinc is limiting, you want to be looking at that up to a quart per acre, typically either on the seed or by the row or even foliar fed. But in this case, we're talking about in the seed or on the furrow. And SG fulvic. Fulvic acid is basically some of the Leonardite coal that we have in humic acids. It's extracted out of humic acids. It's more caramel colored. It's prettier. It doesn't have the total amount of carbon, but its chemistry allows you to do it and mix in with many, many things and not have trouble. So we've gone to fulvic acid because humic acids can be a little bit goofy, especially if we're adding more and more things as stuff comes on the market. If you mess with the pH a little bit, the humic acid can get gloppy and sticky and settling out and all kinds of goofy things. So we use the fulvic acid to make it easier for everybody. That's a food source. So if you got biology with food and orthophosphate and micronutrients, we just kind of went through. It's like, wow, we're kind of meeting the needs when the needs are there. And that's what it's for. It's to set the stage. We get pictures now started because people start using it coming back all the time with emergence and early growth with SG on seed programs. We get a lot of these. And of course, anybody that's ever used a lot of biostimulants typically does get a lot of these. So you can see the different root masses. So this is one that's been treated with the starter, one on the right that has not. Now, that's not really a bad root system. Most people would say, that's pretty decent. But look at the difference in the density, the quantity of finer roots, the secondary, the third level roots, how much more dense it is. Now I'm going to ask you a serious question, and you need to listen and answer it. If you had these two plants in a 30-inch separation, one looked like this and one looked like this, which plant has more nutrients in it? Plants are designed to, they've shown us, they explore about 3% of the area underneath them. What happens if you get them up to 4% or 5%? Which plant has more nutrients in it? That's not a trick question. Can you see the obvious? The one on the left is bigger. It has a bigger base at stalk, and unit per unit, there's way more nutrients in there. Here's the other serious question. What did I have to do to the soil test, in this case, to make that happen? What? We have people shaking their heads. No. Did I have to change it at all? No. Does that mean I can't change it? No. But did I have to? No. Makes you scratch your head. So if that's the case, if I can make this happen year in and year out, if I can make this happen year in and year out, do you believe I can do that? If I can make that year in and year out, would you call that technology? Does anybody in here use atrazine? Look at all the confessors. Yeah, we still use atrazine. Would you call that technology? What does atrazine do? I mean, I'm not talking about in the big picture. What simply does atrazine do? It kills weeds. Do you expect it to kill weeds year in, year out? If you don't spray it, do the weeds die? No. Would you call that technology? I would. Herbicide companies have been technology companies for years. This is biotechnology. This is technology, folks. This is repeatable. And if I can make that repeatable, and you know in your own mind, you just answered your own questions, do you need the same amount of fertility in the soil to get plants to be more nutrient dense? Huh? No. Geez, Tom, you're off on a room. Nobody else said anything. You're the only guy in the room that believes that.
Well,
No.
I want to say too, we've seen this many, many times when you come out with the field. You've got a bigger plant on the left side, and we used to cut them open and taste them. The left side will have a sweet taste, and the other side, if you're using like a 1034, will be bitter as hell.
Mm-hmm.
The 1034 plant could be taller.
Yes.
Because it's got more nitrogen.
Right.
But when you look at the root system and the girth of the corn,
That's exactly right.
cut it open and bite in it.
Right.
There's more sugars going on in
the one on the left. That's correct. And the reason that is because the nitrogen content and the salt content of the 1034O, if the plant doesn't get up above the soil quickly and begin to grow and get rid of the nutrient down below it, it'll kill it. It's too salty and too high in nitrogen. So it knows I got to get away from this situation, or I've got to manage it somehow. So it gets pushed. And if you were in a situation where you had a bad weather event coming in, it got out of the ground faster, it's going to make the 1034O win the program if everything else was still under the ground by an additional 12 hours and got soaked up and saturated and asphyxiated and it died. But that's a unique situation.
My logic is look at that. So now you've got a plant better root system to help your plants and have stress better. When you get corn borer or rootworm coming in, there's more roots to eat.
Yes, yeah, and it also regenerates those roots faster because it's got extra energy to pull back if it has to. And I think this is a strange thing. And like I said, when we talk about animal feeders that have this, it's like, look, even the animals are going to tell you that. They're going to show it to you. when you feed it. They're not going to need to take as many bites to get the same amount or more nutrition. And we see that time after time after time across the entirety of the country that people start to adopt the technology. Which one of these three choices now would be the perfect season-long phosphate starter? 1034-0, high in polyphosphate. Even manufactured, the best qualities are 30% ortho, 70% poly. 725-5, high orthophosphate, 80-20. With biology, an assist or complement. Which one of those three choices is a season-long phosphate starter? That is a trick question. It's funny how you're all like, don't say anything. This guy's got something up his sleeves. That's right. Because together as a package, they make a perfect starter and season-long release of orthophosphate. But by themselves, any one of those is not a season-long starter. There is no such thing as a season-long starter. You start the plants off, get the roots underneath them, get them off to the races, and they are going to take over. And if you have polyphosphate that needs to be broken down, and if you want to use 1034-0, there are a lot of other choices now, but if you wanted to use that and together with this system as a 2x2, that system is going to last you a long, long time throughout the entirety of the season. Because it's releasing orthophosphate from the beginning, the middle, and the end part. The thing about it is, because of all the other phosphate in the soil, how much of this do we need? We've been cutting back on this for years, and people are like, well, don't take away my 1034-0. I gotta have it. Along with your dry fertilizer? Yes, yes. Now think about it, even as the dry fertilizer. If I'm putting out the dry fertilizer and spreading it everywhere, the only way my plants find orthophosphate from phosphate fertilizer spread all over where is what? Does it all just magically move with water? Phosphate, in some cases, only moves 1 or 2 millimeters in its lifetime. It's not restricted because it reacts with everything chemically. So it moves a little bit and finds something to marry up with. And just like that, it's like, I'm not phosphating anymore. Thank God I'm married. Very unstable. So the only way that you're going to find that phosphate is what? Through a better root system. And if you've ever seen soils that are lower in fertility, total fertility, and you dig them up, have you ever done that? Dug up your plants? We go out all the time with people in this community. We go out and we drive and we look. We have farm trains out here. Guys have pickup trucks laying everywhere. It's like, what's going on over there? We're digging up plants, and invariably when we dig up the plants, the root masses under lower total P and K are way bigger. And people are like, man, that's good fertilizer. Yeah, a little bit, but that's not the whole story. Plants are designed to dig for their living. You've heard people say, it's supposed to be as much roots underneath the soil as stuff above the ground. But if you put too much fertilizer in too high concentrations, too close to the plant or just everywhere, you dig up the plants and they're like, wow, the roots seem to kind of only go out so far. I don't know how many times I've heard you people in this room say, man, that's a nice root system. And then dig up something where maybe we snuck across the fence and looked at the neighbors like, my gosh, this guy doesn't have very good roots. And that used to be me. Because they got so much fertilizer, the plants don't have to work for a living. What happens when it gets dry and you got less roots? That's not a trick question. There are little subtle things that I'm talking about, folks, that make all the difference in the world in your success rates. Little things that we don't stop to think about that we have done not on purpose, just unknowingly. There's nothing wrong with ignorance unless it goes on for way too long. And then also, if you say, well, that won't work, then stupidity comes in, and I don't deal well with stupidity. But ignorance is okay because we don't know what we don't know. Okay? Phosphate petiole samples. This was 2022 results from a potato farm. Now, we do have some potato growers here locally. This isn't just for potato growers. This is a whole idea behind plants and how they grow. So work with me. This was 2022 results. This red line is a drawn in line because this is the normal situation of what people see in petioles and potatoes. These are dates down below. So starting at 7/7 and on a weekly basis all the way through the middle part of August each week. And they go out and take petiole samples. Leaves are attached to petioles, petioles attached to the main stem. And they've learned for years and years that when we check the petioles and its phosphorus availability, that's giving us a really good indication of the energy levels and potential of those plants. So oftentimes, this is a moderate critical level. This is a severe critical level on phosphate in tissues and total yield. How many of you have ever grown a potato, whether it be in the garden or anywhere else? When is the most important time you would think for high energy levels to be available in a potato plant? You harvest what on potatoes? Do you harvest the vines? You harvest what we call tubers in the root. What do tubers do? They start out little teeny tiny, and they're supposed to get big. When is the greatest need for energy in that plant? When they start to get big, which is when, and this is in the San Luis Valley in South Central Colorado, which is right in the early to mid part of August. Here, we are at August 10th, and the lines have this is what happens normally. You'll see it here in the other data, and you see this was from guys that were actually using some of the program now and testing our results where we actually put in on seed starter. Phosphate could go out as dry phosphate, 1034 beside the row, and then they in the sideband, for instance, and then they also start putting in a little bit of biology and a little bit of orthophosphate, either foliar fed or through the pivot. Just little bits. And all of a sudden, even in 2022, when they started looking at this, like, whoa, we've never seen this before. The phosphorus started staying above the critical lines. And yields kind of started to, some of these situations, they were improving. They're looking at the sets, they're looking at the fill, they're looking at the size, and it's like, hey, something's going on here. That was enough to get their attention. And even the consulting firms in that area said, we've never seen this before. What is going on? They're not using enough fertilizer to get this done. Or they're snookering us. They're telling us they're putting in a little, but they're putting a lot. Because they've never seen it. Jump to 2023. Here's the conventional treatment with 1034O and lots of dry fertilizer. Look at the lines. This is 726, 84. 726, 84. 721, 726 is clear over here, and then 884. Now look over here. Very rarely did it ever get below the moderate critical level. And these guys are like, good grief. This is impressive. And then at the end of the year, when they harvested the potatoes, they harvested in 100-pound sacks. And many of these people they were tickled to death sometimes at 400, 450, 500-pound sacks per acre. And some of these guys popped 600 in a year when the sacks were $15 a pop. Think of the amount of investment, this little amount of investment, to pick up an extra $1,500 an acre. Now you go to the valley. We've been out there for how many years? 25 to 30. The only snake oil company that has survived any kind of length of time. And you look at the potato acres in the valley, and the potato acres are what percentage, roughly? Half.
You're not talking about our valley.
No, your valley is still playing ignorance. Shame on me, this is being recorded.
Yeah.
No, that doesn't mean it's bad. It's just the information hasn't got to people yet. They're still kind of waiting for the light to go on. But they're getting close. Everybody's getting close. Everybody knows we're this close to figuring something out. Yeah, we are, because the devil's in the details. So if you add biological activity to this, if you crank up biology around the roots, all those little root hairs, all those secondary, third level, fourth level, with root hairs on them, and you have biology releasing phosphorus all season long, plants are higher in energy. You can get it in complement. live biology, which is live microbes, bacteria, fungal, a little bit of mycorrhizal type materials, not as much as we'd like. We're still working on that. SG Assist, which gives you food and biology. MaxGrow, lots of amino acids along with some biology. SG Advance, which is a foliar with lots of micronutrients, lots of plant protectants, stress relievers, and biology. Enforce, amino acids, the most favored form of nitrogen that's gone on for thousands of years because it's the most readily available and most recognized by plants. Because of that time, we have amino acids that you can use in the furrow. You can use them 2 by 2, but it's not as successful, or foliar fit. And what again is an amino acid? I said a while ago, those are sugars that have nitrogen groups stuck on. So if they see the amino acid and they want the nitrogen, which they do, they cleave off the nitrogen. What's left in that molecule? Sugar. What is sugar? Food. And we have guys that are using low levels of this stuff, and it's like, that's not possible. It's not possible. Something that small in that quantity can't do anything. It's not possible. Well, how do you explain it? I don't know, but it's not possible. Well, there you go. So we started working with systems like that. Accelerate. Accelerate is different than this biology and the other stuff because Accelerate is the cellulose and lignin degraders. It's the stuff that breaks down fodder. You know, I was doing something the other day. People don't really understand that. If you took a corn stalk and you think about the outside of it, that's a woody material. That's lignin, like wood, lignin. The inside, long strands of what looks like styrofoam. That's cellulose or hemicellulose. If you had ring structures, and this is kind of representing the outside of the corn stalk, but it's to show an example. There are many structures within these types of compounds that are rings. And you have to have enzymes that can attack rings. Well, enzymes can't fit themselves around a great big ring. They can take, although one corner, they're set up with carbon spots. That's what holds the ring together, is carbon bonds. But if you have the right enzyme, it can come in there on one of these circles and attach itself to the carbon bond because it has the right enzymes, and it splits apart the carbon bond. And when it splits apart, it straightens out what was a ring and now turns it into a straight line. Once it turns into a straight line, everybody jumps on and starts eating their piece. And there's a buffet that happens. If lignin is wood, and we knew that this was really common, if you had wood that was constantly being broke down, how would our structure stay in one piece? It's more of a rare thing. What kind of things break down wood and weaken structures? What would we call those organisms that got in there? Well, we would call them rots, fungus. It's a bad situation. What is it that breaks down a lot of the stalks and these bonds in the field? Rots. Stalk rots. Are those beneficial? Well, they are to get the process started. Do you want to feed stalk rot in your field? Does that interest you? Oh, sure, because I can use fungicides to kill them anymore, huh? There are beneficial organisms, however, that do the same thing. And once you put the beneficial organisms out there and they outcompete, because they replicate at a much faster rate than the bad guys do, you can take care of this. And you can turn all the nutrients that are bound in those cells loose back on the top of the soil, release carbon off as carbon dioxide, help everybody jump on and create a buffet. And that is the beginning of soil health. Because as those microbes work that system, just like us, they breathe in oxygen and they breathe out what? Carbon. I hear somebody whispering it. Carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide. Oh, well, Dan, we don't want that to happen. That's the greenhouse gas. It's destroying the world. We're killing ourselves. Ah, bullcrap. That's a lie. And if you don't believe it, catch me afterwards. I'll show you exactly what happens. I don't have time, and I've got the mic and everything else. I haven't got time to do this. It's a lie. The limiting factor in agricultural production is the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that the plant can pull in. It's the highest need it has for anything is carbon dioxide. So anyone who wants carbon dioxide levels in the planet to drop only has one thing in mind. One thing. Do they want more food or less food? Less food. So don't accept the lie. Okay? If you have cellulose in the center, hemicellulose, it's the same thing. Complex created molecules, and certain organisms have the ability to break it out. Now, if you think about those like as Legos, if you can just pop off pieces of the Lego and you've got these little simple pieces out there now, everybody jumps on and eats them. It's getting the Legos broken apart initially to start that's the limiting factor. And that's what accelerate organisms do. They break down cellulose and lignin, and they start the ability for everybody to jump on and feed. Alfalfa or grains. Emergence and early growth. A guy that set up his seeder to be able to put orthophosphate and assist, some complement down in the furrow, and one side, he coming around, he forgot to turn it on. Look at what you got. Are roots important to alfalfa? Do roots on alfalfa go deep? They better. And the faster you make them and the deeper they go, especially where we've had moisture and things, the farther down they go, the more efficient that alfalfa growth is. And you can get alfalfa stands. We've had people, go for 10 years with alfalfa stands, finally need the soil for something else and turn them down. Very different than a lot of people who can only get 2 to 3 years out of their alfalfa anymore, especially with dry fertilizer. If you put lots and lots of dry fertilizer on a plant to start out looking like this, does it have more roots or less roots? It has less roots. If it has less roots, how's it going to compete side by side with this? If you can get these roots down several feet, you don't go through moisture stress on alfalfa like you do other crops because they can be deep-rooted plants. I've seen studies where they show roots under alfalfa in gravel soils 28 to 40 feet deep. It's funny, it's gravel. Gravel can't produce alfalfa. If you've ever had a gravel field and you've done it right, it's like the gravel field produces better alfalfa than the finer texture soil because it's always got nutrients down below and moisture. And all the people that tell us when they foliar feed alfalfa and cut back on a lot of the dry fertilizer, it typically produces at least a full extra ton or more a year under dry conditions when everybody else shuts down. It keeps right on growing. It's hard to fight with that. And so we have lots and lots of people who've looked at growing crops differently and they're like, this is more successful. Now, the only limiting factor is if there's a lot more roots in this, does it suck out phosphorus in the available form more or less? It's okay, you can say it. More, good for you. Kevin. More. So, do the soil test levels go down? Yeah. Don't get surprised when that happens. There's only so many miracles an agronomist can make. So the soil test levels are going to fall. Is that going to hurt alfalfa that has roots all over the place, feet deep with phosphorus everywhere? However, if you're going to come back to a small seeded crop, and we call corn and soybeans, wheat, barley, small seeded. If you're coming back to a small seeded crop, especially if this thing has sat there for 6, 7, 8 years, soil test levels are going to be low. So the year that you're going to turn it out, right before the year you're going to turn it out, smart guy says, I'm going to put some fertilizer back in here. Okay, there's not a thing wrong with that. You haven't spent a whole lot of money on a lot of other things in the system. So you can put some phosphate fertilizer, maybe a little potash back in it. It's not for this, it's for the follow crop. And you're going to be fine. However, do not get suckered into this business of the co-op coming in and saying, we know those soil test levels are grossly low. You need to be on the build program and you need the 300 program. What? The 300 program, 300 potash, 300 phosphate, and if it's going to be corn, as much nitrogen as you can afford. No. Because when you do that, you upset the apple cart. I've told people 100 to 150 pounds, if you wanted to really push it, 100 to 150 pounds maximum of those two products, and you will be fine. Especially since if it's going to be corn, what have you now learned that you're going to do for that corn when you plant it? You're going to put what in the furrow? An orthophosphate starter. They're going to be fine. Everything's going to be perfectly fine. And if you want to build it over time and want to build it back up, that's entirely up to you. It's your money. You can do with whatever you want. But do it gently. Don't upset the apple cart, because when you put that much salt out there and it dissolves and that plant sucks in the salt, what's it got to have to keep the salt at bay? And if it's a dry year, what happens? You get your lunch fed to you. It's bad. And I've seen people do this and they're expecting the best year with the corn following that they've ever seen. and it can be the worst year they've ever seen. I've seen it happen with my own eyes many, many times.
Hey, Dan, could you go back real quick to the phosphate slide, the 2021 real quick? I just want to point on this. This was, when this happened, coming back to this and keeping the phosphate levels in this case up high, this is a pretty big deal. Our distributor contacted us 2 years ago in 22 when it first started happening and was kind of questioning us, like, we've never seen anything like this. It was a pretty big deal. I mean, he's been doing this for 25 years at that point, never seen levels stay this high. So I just want to kind of draw it back to kind of what we do up here. The way this started happening, they were doing the onset program. They were putting biology on the seed, as a lot of you guys are already doing, but they started adding it into their polyphosphate sideband when they plant, and then they started even adding it in season as they sprayed or irrigated. And these are irrigated potatoes, obviously. So when they started putting that sideband, these other bands later, their nitrogen shots later, that's when they started to see these charts on the right happen, which are huge, huge change. So like when we came to you guys a couple of years ago and we started trying to get intervene, which is a kelp-folic combo into the sideband nitrogen, that's why. Some cases we're trying to add a little biology to that as well. This is why. And some of our foliar products have a little biology baked into them as well as you spray in season. I think where we're going in the future, in my opinion, is trying to increase that affordably. How do we get more live bios out even in the season to make this kind of thing happen in our corn and soybean fields up here and other places we work? So anyway, I just want to kind of relate it back to, that's why we brought intervene up here. That's why we're trying to get the biology in these other bands and these other applications, not just on the seed, because we can get these kind of things to happen and happen longer and sustain longer. And that could be huge going forward.
Right. So it can fit into the Y dropping. It can fit into the foliar feeds, even with fungicide applications and some other opportunities. A lot of people don't realize, and especially if you're going to do that, do it with some sugar to feed the microbial growth and put it on the surface of a leaf. I've been challenged by professors before that said, you know, you can't go spray microbes on the surface of a leaf and get 6 to 12 bushels. You can't spray sugar on the surface of a leaf and get 6 to 12 bushels, especially on soybeans. Don't you realize it takes 60 pounds of sugar per acre to make a bushel of soybeans? And you're telling me you're picking up 6 to 12? You're a liar. It's not coming from the sugar. Pretty bold. Call me a liar. No. Got to recognize it. If it's a corn leaf or a soybean leaf, if you spray sugar on the surface of a leaf in water, oftentimes you'll see that water spot set there on the surface of a leaf, and the water tension will break eventually. But now all the sugar is laying up on the surface of the leaf. I did some interesting research one cold wintry morning when I started thinking about this. It woke me up at 4:30 in the morning. I actually think God woke me up. It was good. He told me several things. He says, check this out. What happens is when the light comes down as photons and it hits the sugar contains what's called a refractive index. So now we got physics. We got chemistry, and now we got physics. When it hits it, it spreads out into the prism that we've all seen, the prism. When it spreads the prism out, the light is actually spread out into a much more uniform pattern. Instead of just being a spot going down and hitting whatever it went through, it spreads out. And when it spreads out, the 400 nanometer range is blue light. The way a plant is created is whenever blue light strikes inside of a cell that has inside its chlorophyll, all those little dots of chlorophyll, inside all those little dots of chlorophyll are little tiny micro nanometer structures called chloroplasts, which have thylakoids that are like stacked coins inside the cell. This gets down to the level of, the reason we didn't know a lot of this stuff years ago is we didn't have the equipment to check it. And what happens is whenever any blue light touches any one of these thylakoids, it turns on the machine and it makes sugar. It tells the plant it's time to make sugar. These thylakoids say, make sugar, make sugar, make sugar, make sugar. So when you sprayed sugar on the surface of a leaf, we always assume that the sugar gets absorbed in, and it does. But sitting on the surface of the leaf, it changes the entire way that a plant sees its world. And when you spread that out into a prism, instead of just hitting a few thylakoids on the way down, it hits a bunch of them. And all of a sudden, the plant makes sugar from a sugar application. That's a pretty good science trip. All right?
No question. Yes.
You hope so?
Yeah.
I'd be disappointed. That's why I told you, don't try to memorize all this stuff. This isn't about memorizing stuff. This is about connecting the dots. Now, I said a while ago, if I put microbes on there, we've had people spray microbes on the surface and get a response to just microbes. How? Is there any sugar in microbes? Probably, but nothing measurable to this extent, right? Well, how could that work? The very same morning I got all this information I was looking at, I thought to myself, I wonder, do microbes have a refractive index when they sit on the surface, these little tiny things? Sure enough, the work had been done. So if you spray microbes all over this leaf and you feed it sugar, if you feed the microbes sugar, what do? They replicate. And every one of those little tiny microbes sitting on the surface of the leaf has the exact same refractive index as sugar. So if you spread them all over the leaf and photons of light are hitting it, what's happening to all those photons of light? They get turned into the spectrum. Yeah. If you thought fertilizer technology was fascinating, try biology and physics. Haven't even got to, I mean, most of us can't stand chemistry. Wait till we start talking about physics. The only physics you care about is horsepower and steel, right? Give me smoke, man. Smoke for a living.
Dan, on the phosphate topic, somebody, Kevin Kronville here is watching online. He said, would 1034.0 have a benefit in a 2x2 band on a field with long-term manure application history?
It would not have as high a benefit. The only reason it would be a benefit is if for whatever reason the entire field dried down and you were close enough to the row and you got a little bit extra moisture, you might get a benefit. Otherwise, no, typically it wouldn't necessarily increase it. It's like putting wide drops of lots of extra nitrogen when you're already at 220 pounds of applied nitrogen, and you put nitrogen on as a wide drop and it doesn't do anything because you're already over nitrified. Same thing there. If it's been a long-term scenario with phosphate as manure, then the phosphate should be coming out of the manure. The phosphate level should be high, so it'd be probably less likely that you'd get a consistent response. Doesn't mean you can't, but a consistent response, which is kind of what we're after. I doubt if it would do that. Hey, I got a question. Cool. That particular wheat field, basically, this was forage wheat, and you can see the quality of it. And I swear to you, these cows, when they came up to us, because we were out there hunting that day, and those cows came up and they actually smiled at us. They were the happy cows. They're not California cows. I've never seen a cow in California happy. You should see the quality of the food they get. But these are happy cows. And look at the root mass that's underneath this. This was from Brian's farm. That soil has gotten better and better over time. Is that carrying massive levels of phosphate, Brian? Those fields?
About 6 parts.
6? Ooh. Time to put a little phosphate on, right? Do you put phosphate on ever? Every once in a while, do you put some phosphate on? Yeah, he's going to go broke. He's losing it. He's lost it. You're going to lose the farm, Brian. You can't do that. It won't work. Okay. Obviously, we're in jest here. I don't recommend everybody draw them down that low because in some cases, especially where tillage is necessary, in long-term no-till and some other things are happening. But it doesn't mean that for whatever reason, if you get a soil test back and it's 10 or 12 or 15 parts per million, you're going to lose the farm. That's not necessarily true. If you follow some of the things we're talking about here, I have never seen anybody lose the farm. Grain needs energy late to fill those kernels, those berries. They need energy late. You can put on nitrogen in the right form, amino acids, or ammonium forms of nitrogen sprayed on the flag leaf, as well as even some biology, because the biology, when it sets in the glooms of the heads here, it will help fight off other diseases and also increase the ability to get more sunlight and drive things. It's actually fascinating what people are starting to do with some of the wheat as they're making foliar applications. It's one of the reasons why we don't tell people just completely focus in on NPK fertilizers as foliar. You need other things in there to make the system work more efficiently. What do we do with these things? Now, I suppose we could probably talk soybeans for an hour. I haven't got time. But what do we do with these things? These things that we treat as the... Oh, never mind. Can't say that on the microphone. But we go after these things because it's like a break for us. We need it in a rotation. We don't want to take care of this as much. If we're going to do it, we're going to feed the corn and let the beans have the rest, which is 180 degrees out of whack. If you understand what corn does and how sensitive it is, you should really feed beans and let corns have the rest, and that throws people. And I've been doing work with people on NPK fertilizers. This year, the guys who put on the most fertilizer on soybeans got the highest yield and were the most disappointed. They were tickled that the yield went high, but they told us they lost massive amounts of money. The guys who put on low levels of material also didn't get much response. The guys who put on an on-seed starter on the roots to grow the root masses much bigger and put on limited amounts of fertilizer hit a massive home run. Why? If you're spreading low levels of fertilizer, how dense is the fertilizer on the surface of the soil? That's kind of spread hither and yon. I said a while ago, the only way you get that fertilizer is in through what? Roots. Do beans put down massive, massive deep roots in big fibrous bunches? They put down a taproot, and depending on how deep the taproot goes to help bring in moisture and things from below, they'll put on a fibrous root mat, and they'll also run. And if you get them to run and you put on a little bit of fertilizer and you needed that fertilizer, lo and behold, plant responds. So we started talking about encouraging root growth early through starters. You do not use NPK starter fertilizer for soybeans. They are different. They are sensitive. They will shut down faster in the presence of too much fertilizer on the seed. I have watched this for years now. A little every once in a while can give you some stimulation, but you don't need lots. Don't get suckered into thinking these things look like other plants. They don't. They're sensitive. They're hormonally driven. They need lots and lots of energy. They're a C3 plant compared to corn and sorghum and other grasses that are C4 plants, tropical. They need intense sunlight. These can't make the same amount of food that corn plants do. They're different. So your starter should have biology. It should have carbon like humic acids, fulvic acids, sugars. It should have food in it and on the seed, and especially biology. Most recent information out on biology is the biology that comes with that seed, that's in the presence inside that seed or outside the seed, is what drives the majority of those microbes to be there throughout the entire season in the format they're delivered. That's fascinating. Which means what? If beans are actually taking biology from the atmosphere and putting them into their seed, do you have a chance to influence that? Yes. And so if you start thinking about that, if I put biology on the seed as a seed treatment, if I grow them in the foliar and have biology on the foliar and put it into the bean plant and it puts it inside the seed, then that biology can be there next spring. And the guys who have started growing the soybean seed for the seed companies with the biology, the seed companies have started noticing something different about their seed. The germs are better. They're more consistent. They can potentially yield higher if everything else lines up. That research has set a precedent for us. You can start out with carbon in the soil, in the starter, and do these types of things. Get them off to the races and get them going. How many of you suffer with water hemp and mare's tail? A few hands come up now, huh? Are the chemicals working for you? Yes. Are you going to pull them out of your program? No. But what happens if you're using a pre-emergence type product, some of the heavy-duty blasters that are low use rates, and you get more than 1.5 inches of rain when these beans are either hopefully germinated and growing and broke the soil, because otherwise if they're trying to come up through it and they get a blast, they can die. But if they come up, they get 1.5 inches of rain on them, they suck in this herbicide, which is not going to kill those beans, but just like that, it turns off physiological systems and it shuts them down and they go into a funk. And they may sit there how long? Have you seen this? How long can they sit there? At least a couple weeks. We've had guys say as long as a month. Now you got to understand, new information in the last few years. Soybeans are responding to heat units. I got furious with Purdue University when they told me that, and they said they didn't say they'd been hiding it. I'm like, when were you going to tell us? When were you going to tell us? Beans are flowering in May. You told us, you trained us, you said, think this, the only reason soybeans flower is they respond to day length. Shortened day length, which means they don't really start flowering hard until when? June and early July. Yet I'm standing out here looking at a guy who planted beans on the first day of April, and May 25th, flowers all over these beans. And when I asked the guy, I said, how could that happen? He said, they're responding to heat units. I said, don't you think that would be important to a consult? This is a consulting group now. This was a Purdue University field day for consultants only. I said, don't you think that would be fairly important to guys like us? When were you going to get around to telling us? I was not making any friends with the government at that point. Because I said, if that's the case, we got to do a whole lot of things to make people take advantage of early planting. So if you plant April 1st, well-intentioned, beans in the ground, pre-emergence on, and you get an inch and a half of rain, let's say the 8th of April, they're up and growing, or let's say maybe the 10th of April. Good conditions, they're up and growing, bam. They get an inch and a half of rain. Now we just shut them down. And they sit there for a minimum of 2 weeks, especially under cool, wet growing conditions. That's why sometimes it's 3 and sometimes it's 4. You live through it. Conditions have been kind of crappy. You come out, now you planted the 1st, the 2nd, the 5th of May. Put stuff on, everything's changing a little bit. Beans come up, they take off. Maybe you didn't put some pre-emergence on, maybe you did, but you didn't get those soaking rains. You get down to the end of the year, you harvest the beans. You bought the same bean, same maturity, same everything. You planted the beans in May, everything was perfect. You harvest the beans, 65 bushel. You harvest these beans, 45 bushel. 45 bushel. You ask yourself and you call guys like me, how come that happened? Supposed to, when you plant them early, you're supposed to do better. If it sits still, gentlemen, for 2 or 3 weeks when the sun is shining, there's heat out there, and it can take no advantage of that situation, why would it give you anything more? If those beans get hurt, you got to help them. You got to put on, if you took the carbon starter that you had and you put on a half a gallon to the acre, you bought a gallon, but instead of using the gallon because you know you're going to run into the wall, you put on a half a gallon, you came back with that same starter, and the minute you know you've had that inch and a half of rain, as soon as it's dry enough, you got to be on that field. And if you can't get on the field, that's a situation where I don't care how much the drone costs. You spray them. Why? Well, how many bushels am I going to get, Dan? Is it the same old, well, if we do it, maybe we'll get 2 or 3? 15 to 25. 15 to 25. Nobody in their right mind wants to stand out here and blame this problem on low bean yields on the herbicide company. Herbicides don't hurt the beans. They don't kill them. They're perfectly fine. They just get a little slow for a while. The devil's in the details. 15 to 25 bushels. I beg to differ. Every single one of you wants 15 to 25 more bushels, right? Tom said, for those not hearing, he'd like to just have 25 bushels. We're not talking chump change. And we're not talking about anything difficult. If you want to plant early, you make sure those beans keep growing, and food sources will help them do it. In 24 to 48 hours, I guarantee you, if you do this, what I've just said, you will be sending us pictures, because we've had it done multiple times across the entire country. No one wants to believe and accept that this situation with stuff in the soil is causing bean loss. And it's a lie. The other thing that's causing bean loss is too much nitrates in the corn crop prior in the season, left over in the stalks, laying on the surface, causing the roots to not nodulate. You've got to under-nitrify the corn crop to a certain extent because leftover nitrates are butchering your soybean yield because they cause beans to grow tall, but nitrate doesn't do anything for reproduction. Nothing. Nitrogen is not nitrogen. And late sulfur needs. All these new modern varieties, the enlists, the dicambas, all of the newer ones need ammonium sulfate or sulfate fertilizer in August and September. They've documented that well in the genetics that are out there. They need more sulfur. So the government told us to pull the sulfur down. The government is now telling us to buy the sulfur and put it back. When you get all these things going in the right direction and the beans are better, they're less stressed, they put on more total beans. If the bean's stressed at about V3 to V5, it tells itself it's going to be a tough year. Put on less pods and make the beans bigger. If it gets everything through there and gets later stress at R3, it says put on lots more beans and make them smaller, which is why you see smaller beans at the end of the season, but you see lots more of them. Just got to get them up to the point where they don't pass through the combine. Got a program for that too. So foliar feeding mid and late season is enhanced by better roots and less stress. So soybean starter, what makes sense? You can use some 725-5 if you choose, but I suggest to you 1 gallon is plenty. I've tested and tested and tested for 25 years, up to guys with 5 to 7 gallons, and it never pays. 1 gallon is enough if you want some P and K and a little bit of nitrogen.
After it's set up for it, you spray that out with tree.
You can, yeah. But the thing is, it would be better if it was banded. Well, you're not going to do that because you're putting on a herbicide. So I would suggest if you want to spray it, don't put it on with your pre. Just come back in an early post situation when the beans are up and can receive it. Because you may actually run into this problem we just said a while ago. And so if the beans are actually in pretty good shape and they don't need any help, they're going to need it. So hold it for them. That would be my suggestion.
And the 7.55, we really prefer to see sprayed on anyway. We'd
Yeah.
rather see 0. Like if you have on seed starter, just put water. Don't do any starter. Just run up microbes and food source. Or in your case, if you don't have liquid on it, just spray it all. Because that's where you'd rather see a gallon or two of 7.55 anyway. You'd rather not see it on the seed.
And the other thing is, if you do use 725-5 and you're going to use complement and you do follow through with a fulvic, you could reduce that rate down to a half a pint, 8 ounces, because they will grow in the fulvic. If you're not going to use the fulvic, you definitely need a pint to the acre of complement if you're going to do that in starter. Or if you're using Originate, which is seed treatment. If you want to use a seed treatment, then you could reduce this because you're going to have some microbes on the seed and you have other microbes in the furrow. You could reduce that. The seed treatment Originate goes on like 2 to 4 ounces per 100 pounds of seed. That's about $1.15 an ounce. Time we got?
1040.
1040. We're rushing. We can do a complete biochemical testing array, not complete, but a much more complete, and actually understand what each and every one of these microbes, these numbers represent the microbial group, do. And we can plot what capabilities we found with some of the even limited amount of stuff that we can do today biochemically. And we find out that in many cases, organisms do way, way more things than we knew. We understand that in some cases, we think some microbes could do as many as 1,000 different things if called upon to do so. The only reason they're utilizing these differently is because they want to get fed. So if a lot of these organisms, like for instance, look at all these are up here that all break down cellulose. Well, if the only way they were going to get fed was cellulose and all these are side by side, it's a matter of where you are next to the roots. But if you can actually make ammonia, see, this one doesn't make ammonia, but if this one does make ammonia, it's like, hey, I'm needing nitrogen. You're breaking down all that cellulose. That's good for me on carbon, but I'm running low in nitrogen. Well, this one can kick on a nitrogen if he's in the right spot and tell the plant, hey, send me sugars. I'll make you nitrogen over here. I'll make you babies and nitrogen over here. So now what you see is these microbes, if they're out here in a very biodiverse situation, can do a multitude of different things. All I got to do is just communicate with the plant and be in the right place. Start looking at nitrogen, just nitrogen. And we say one of the major competitors out here that has helped raise the tide and it brings all ships into shore. Save yourself 40 units of nitrogen. Put in this and it makes nitrogen. 2 bioengineered bugs that make nitrogen. That's not supposed to be mixed into starter. It's not supposed to be mixed with nitrogen. It's not supposed to be mixed with chemicals. It dies bouncing up and down the road if the road is too bad. They even tell you that if you ask. I told people, I said, What you're getting ready to do, that product won't do. Call the company back and tell them that you want your money back. Because this is what you intend to do. Because you're not going to get out of that what you paid. And there's no way that once you do that and you tell them that the warranty is valid, they're going to say, no, you validated the warranty. You're not supposed to do that. So they called the company back and they actually gave them their money back. Now, my name is Mud, but they were going to waste their money. I've seen dealers for this stuff 3 years in a row. Every single customer they went to, it never worked once. They sold it for 3 years thinking that it would, and it never did. And they finally quit. And the company's like, why are you quitting? We've never been beat significantly at all by a nitrogen manufacturing compound. Never. Why? Ammonia, 14 different organisms. Urease, 6 different organisms. Nitrogen from the air, 6 different organisms. You got 26 organisms alone that can focus in on nitrogen if they're called upon. And if they're not called upon to do that, they can break down proteins, break down starches, break down lipids, release phosphate, make root growth hormones. They do all these things. They're not bioengineered, they're naturally occurring. This study was done when we figured some of this stuff out, about the second year or so after the product had been released, compared side by side with complement, the competition with the complement. All the yellow boxes are where the tissue levels were significantly higher than in the one where they just had nitrogen manufacturing compounds. This should be no surprise, right? These bugs are versatile. So side by side, if I've got 26 potential bugs that can release nitrogen and they do all these other things, something better happen. Biotechnology.
So here we are again, Terry Workington's. It's May 21st, 2024. This year's double row is where the split occurs. So right, we have here the part that is treated with Pivot Bio. And you can see how it's doing. Got a little bit of dry this past few days before, but not bad. Overall, I didn't do much for the season. Come back here, see the flag. There's a flag. There's a double row. And now we're into the complement zone. And what do you see? It's much fuller rows. The rows are more covered. You see less ground. These plants are actually larger, fuller, doing much better on the complement.
And sometimes when the plants get ahead just like this, you hope everything follows through, because if you get water at the same time on these side-by-sides, it's typical that these are going to grossly out-yield those. Now, for whatever reason, if it's dry for an extended period and this one is behind and this gets dry weather and doesn't pollinate perfectly, but this one does, this can shatter your dreams because it ends up beating the other one. That wasn't because of the technology being bad. It's because the technology put that one in a more advantageous position too early. That happens all the time. We just know that. So here's, again, the picture. You can see the density of the plants, the shaded rows, side by side, same plant, same variety, same planting day, everything else. There's the results. Now, that doesn't mean that because you use that here in North Dakota that you're going to grow 293 bushel corn. Don't take that home with you. If you are lucky enough to get it, fantastic. Not as easy, but that's the difference. I don't think anybody's going to be a little bit unhappy with 254.8, right? It's not Kentucky, but, you know, like I said, we used to joke around up here that people never got close to 200 bushel corn, and you guys are doing it a lot more often. You're all, many of you are saying that. 38 additional bushels. The fact of the matter is, complement is less than half the cost of Pivot Bio. Side by side in the furrow, less than half the cost. Now, if that disappoints you, we can always raise the price. Compare apples to apples. Multiple chelates, we talked about multi-chelated, EDTA, with amino acid type materials. And there are multiples starting to show up these days. The beauty of this is we've done this for years. All of the products that you get with our micronutrients in them are already what we call dual chelated. Okay? The beauty of this is the technology is getting cheaper. You don't have to use as much this product was 9% zinc. 9% dual chelated zinc gets in way more effectively with the amino acids into the plant. So if you wanted to say, instead of using a quart, if you wanted to use 24 ounces, or in an extreme situation, a full pint, and you start measuring the tissue analysis, you're going to find more zinc in the plant. The beauty of it is amino acids transport right to the growing points. We are worried about seeing striping in the leaves, which can be a problem. And so when we apply those things, we want the striping to go away. And oftentimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. But the beauty of it is if you measure the growing points, which is the imperative portion that needs all of those nutrients, they go right to the growing points. And so they accomplish so much more so quickly rather than just straight EDTA. And once again, EDTA is not a bad product. EDTA keeps this product a little less costly. But the technology that's in it and is built in it is going to get better because we're hoping that as this technology comes down, we can afford to put more of the dual chelate in there, and you're going to get better responses all the time. Same stability, mixability, better plant uptake, they're biodegradable. So an amino acid is something that a plant needs and wants and recognizes. It pulls in the amino acid, it breaks apart the bonds that are holding the metal, like a copper, a zinc, a manganese, and iron in the center of it. That keeps those metals at bay so they can't react with anything in a solution. So, if you threw calcium into a phosphate tank, you get that wonderful thing that farmers refer to as cottage cheese. Everybody get really excited about seeing cottage cheese in their spray tank or their fertilizer tank? You know how long that takes to clean out. However, if you put calcium in the center of a chelate and you throw it into the tank, nothing happens because the chelate holds these bonds and keeps the calcium from being able to come out and react with the phosphorus. You put it into the plant's smart enough, all it does is basically touch a hydrogen ion, we call it a proton, touch a hydrogen ion to the chelate pops open, lets the metal out. And if it's the EDTA, it's stable, it doesn't really change. And it's sitting around here driving around now without any metal in it, and it's trying to look for something, and oftentimes it might grab a calcium ion in the plant and tie it up. They don't break down as effectively. But the amino acid is completely broken down and eaten by the plant. So you now delivered the metal that you want, nitrogen to the plant with the leftover sugar. See how these little details start adding up. All of the chelated micronutrients, the zinc, the manganese, iron, and copper, are in a multi-chelate form unless specified. You can buy them in the combinations, and you can also buy them in the individual products. Here are some of those. SG Infuse also has the micronutrient complex in it, so it would have it there. The product analyses are the same, so if you're buying 9% EDTA and you're buying 9% from us, that's still 9%, so you're not getting any less. The MicroStart Zinc, so if you want more zinc for grass crops with some manganese, boron, copper, and iron. If you want balance, which is more for the broadleaves, you can use either one. It's got more boron. It's got an equal amount of boron, like 2%, 2% manganese, 2% zinc, and then the copper and the iron. And also available in those analyses with the standalone micronutrients. Now, you would see the manganese is a 5% product compared to most EDTAs in the market, that's a 6. But we've never seen any 6% manganese that does any better than the 5% with these dual chelates. In the future improvements, hoping to make them higher. The soil, supporting the cycle. Soil is extremely important and has a whole kind of dynamics. The problem with soil is it's an infinite amount of variables changing at an infinite rate. You change something here and everything around it starts to change. And when that starts to change, that makes changes here. And it's a constant moving target, which makes it challenging. Einstein said you can't put soils in a box and expect something to happen consistently because there's too many variables. And he was right. Pervade and engage. Pervade is what we've sold for years. That has the enzymes or a biostimulant in it. Engage is the same product with the enzymes removed. So enzymes are a biostimulant. They're kind of pricey, so they drive the price up. So if you're looking to improve air water management in soils, if they're tight, if they've got a little too much sodium and you want to work on it, you can actually get some of that material to work and work with the sodium and salts, get the water down in and spread around through the soil, as I mentioned a while ago. SG Accelerate, if you want residue degradation and nutrient cycling. Accelerate will break down the stalks, the cellulose, the lignin. if you're trying to manage specifically and you want to tie up salts, you see it, you physically see it, and you want to tie it up, Hydrate R and SG Fulvic are specifically designed for salt remediation. They'll tie up and sponge up the sodium, help them move down, and restore good air and water and biology to the surface. These are all designed to kind of be fall applied programs. Well, we're already by that. They also have very good spring viability. So as you're coming up, if you see some of these things you want to work on, these can also be used in the spring, late winter, early spring. For biology, we just want to make sure that if you want to get 3 to 5 days of a good warm up. So if it's 45 to 55 and it's not freezing hard and solid at night, which you can get by on, even if it's down around 32, it's not that big a deal. But if you got an overwintering situation and you wanted to get the sprayer out, because that's the other thing, most of the sprayers have been winterized, but if you want to get the sprayer out late in the winter, early spring, you can still spray this. And then what happens is those microbes get inside that plant in that 3 to 5 day period. And even if it goes back to being cold from thereafter, it doesn't matter. Most important thing is just get those things inside that stalk. They will begin to work as conditions change back and forth. And we've seen this many, many times. So you can use those whole host of products together in programs to help that soil improve. 5 essential functions of soil: regulating water, sustaining plant and animal life. We try to put food and biostimulants in everything we have for these reasons. Filtering and buffering potential pollutants. So hopefully there's a way to handle too much poisons, if you will, but getting rid of some of that stuff with Hydrate and Fulvic is certainly a possibility. Cycling the nutrients. When stalks are standing there and all those cells have all those nutrients stuck in them, especially potash, which you'll see here in a moment, you can release that material in those stalks, turn the stalks to eggshells. They'll bust open, they open up the cells, and the water, when it comes down, will allow the nutrients to come out. And then soil obviously provides a physical stability and support for the plant. And as you help that soil be more open and pliable so that roots anchor better, you're going to get better physical stability and support for the plant as well. Engage with water regulation. How does Engage compare to humectants and glycerin, which some of the people in different parts of the country are dealing with, people coming out here and doing that? And basically, humectants and glycerin coat stuff and allow water just to move in more effectively, but they don't allow water to move in better into the organic matter. Here's a picture of an illite type clay. You look at this, and this is 20 micrometers. That's 1,000 times smaller than the tip of a straight pin. This is where microbes live, do their work. And you can imagine, what's the smallest root, let's say in inches, what's the smallest root you might see with your naked eye? If you've got good vision, maybe down to like a 64th of an inch, okay? 64th of an inch, relative to 1,000 times smaller than the tip of a pin. If a root come pushing through here, even as a hair root, it will just obliterate this mess. And everything moves out of the way, and it actually encompasses itself around that root. So that root is sitting there exuding off food into all these little spots and slots where the microbes live, and they're breaking down the clay, the sand, the silt, and releasing the elements from that stuff into your plant. That's how the world really functions for plants. And the deeper they go, as long as there's oxygen from the plant that's kind of going down through the roots, and the sugars come out of the roots, even in the depths of down here, and there's a little oxygen in the plant, even microbes can move along with the fluids in the plant and go down that deep and still do work. Gosh, you can almost hear a pin drop in here. Is this a little bit too much? All I did was just want to show you how the world works. It's confusing and it's exciting, and the potential is unlimited. It's a matter of getting this thing to wrap its mind around it, and sometimes we can't because it's so much stuff. Got a question?
I just wanted to make a comment, on the hydrate fulvic acid. A lot of guys are starting to tile now around here.
Right.
You go through those areas that haven't grown anything for the last 5 years. They might be white, they might be black. We tile, had a quarter tile, and we subsoiled it and sprayed those areas, and we had corn growing on it the first year.
Yep. Did it yield it?
Not a big crop.
Did it yield anything?
Not much, but at least it had a
Right,
plant
it started.
Before, it didn't do anything.
Right, right.
So instead of waiting 3 to 4 years for these things to to fix themselves.
That's right.
It take, it's a $10 an acre deal and just spray it on those areas and you'll bring that back into production a lot faster.
That's right. And we've got a large number of people across the northern plains that are starting to understand that. They realize they're giving up soils that used to actually produce something, but now they're salted and they're not. And so starting into programs like this, knowing how to do it, spraying a quart of fulvic acid with maybe a quart of Engage in the fall, and then coming back in the spring and maybe doing it one more time, depending on how severe it is. And they've said the same thing. We actually have plants, and many times even a few plants in the first year will actually yield something. They won't do well. If you can open it up, if you can throw a little gypsum to it, and you can open up and put a little tile in it, when the tile begins to pull water, it starts pulling water from all directions and begins to pull those salts down. Chad had some information last night where he had the tile and the numbers over it, and it was dramatic how the sodium left that soil system in just a single season. There's reasons why you can and should be doing this. Realize that, the tile is going to be running full of salt too. And so wherever they go, make sure that, kind of keep people at arm's length. Like, don't be talking about where salt's going, because in the South, now it's all going to end up in the river. So will nitrates. There's other things going to happen, but that stuff is becoming toxic. The dose determines the poison, right? It's becoming toxic in that soil system. If you can just get it out or get it under control or slurp it up with some fulvic acid and or hydrate, you'll start to get some productivity back. Now, again, don't expect magic miracles oftentimes in the first season. That's not the point of this. The point is it took a long time getting there, and it'll take a little time getting it back, but it's worth it. We did this many years ago here, actually, and we took pictures of it. This is just a roof shingle, lots of tar, lots of pitch, lots of organic carbon, and water is repelled by lots of organic carbon. And so you can see the drop set there, and the surface tension of that water is high. It won't do anything. Jared just took the tip of a paper clip, opened it up, dipped it into a Pervade or an Engage bottle, touched the top of it, and instantaneously, in the video that we had, instantaneously, that drop opened up and the water ran. Instantaneously. It's like no delay at all. Instantaneously. Doesn't do anything. Yeah, no, you can touch it with just the bare paper. No, yeah, that's a good point. No one's ever asked that. Yeah, no.
Somebody might say,
Yeah.
well, you poked it.
Yeah, just blew it up. No, it did not. It poked it. It did not do anything. So this tells you how, in some cases, much easier it is to get water to move and go in different directions, because it's actually just going with gravity here, down the hill. So where's it going to go when it gets in the soil? It gets to choose where it goes. The salt remediation. If the most effective methods to improve the conditions, as it says here, are based on the removal of exchangeable sodium. We talk about salt, and sodium is where we focus because it's one of the saltiest salts. But all salts going together make total salts. The definition of a salt is something that dissociates when you put it into water. Dissociates means come apart. So sodium chloride, which is table salt, when you put it into water, there's sodium ions floating around in the water. There's chloride ions floating around in the water. Potassium chloride, your muriate of potash, you put it in the soil, it dissolves, it dissociates. It's a salt. So salts, over time, if they build up and they don't move down, they begin to have so much salt that they kill the biological life. They kill the root life. It's too toxic. The dose determines the poison. But leaching that sodium out of the soil profile by putting in tile or someplace for it to go, or good water, is going to get rid of this problem. And so we use Hydrate R and fulvic acid to do those things. Hydrate to cause some of the reactions to split apart some of those salts, and fulvic acids also to kind of slurp them up and push them down, grab them and push them down. They'll bind with the cations because the fulvic acid has a very strong negative charge, just like soil does. And it will allow to be able to flush and move them away. This is what salt-affected soil looks like. Everything gets blown apart. There's lots of gaps in some situations, and in other things, the clay will actually swell up, get wet on the surface. It swells so tight that water won't penetrate down through it. So in those salty areas, if you've ever looked at them closely, the surface is wet and slimy. You dig right down below it, it's dry as a bone, because that's the beginning of a bog. You've taken clay, dispersed it, and turned it into just why you would go bentonite if you were going to build a lake at your house. You want clay down there because the clay will restrict the water from flowing through it. That's what the salts do to your soil. So getting rid of the salts, getting them flushed away, now you've got clay that still shrinks and swells, but it shrinks and swells properly, and it leaves a little bit of air channels. The sodium flushes away, and the soil comes back to life with biology added to it and fresher water. We talked about accelerate. Here's some interesting numbers for you. This was from Nebraska's data in 2008 on a 160 bushel corn crop, which sounds low, but I mean, if we talk about averages and different things in places and a lot of marginal soils, that's common. So we always focus in on nutrient value. A lot of people were starting to sell their stocks over to the ethanol plants and such, never realizing what they were giving away. But when you take about 3 tons of fodder on a 160 bushel crop, you've got roughly 50 pounds per acre of nitrogen, 16 pounds of P2O5. Look at the potash. Potash is in the cells, but potash regulates how the cell gets water and moves water around. It's not structurally bound, attached to many things. It's just stuck within the boundaries of the cell. Bust the cell open and the potash leaches out. Sulfur, roughly 14 pounds per acre. So at that time, when Greg was actually doing some of the figures with the values of the nutrients, here we go. So we got 25, 36, 80, $88 just in NPK and sulfur in that 3 ton of fodder. Wheat residue in a similar situation, not quite as valuable, but still lots and lots of nutrients. If you don't like the numbers, they don't add up for you. For a $10 an acre application, throw in a few micronutrients. Those are all real numbers. We have people all the time that have started doing this, and they're like, we can't believe how the soil tests have changed. Wonder why, wonder how that could happen. Pull it from the subsoil, bring it to the top, lock it up in the fodder, release it, and so now instead of being down there in the subsoil, it's right up on top. This works magically. In the sod industry, we sell to sod growers all over the country and people who spray their lawns. They put so much nitrogen on that grass to get it to grow, they're cutting it every 3 days. Now you can imagine cutting every 3 days if you've ever cut your own grass. That's a lot of thatch. That's a lot of clippings. And that thatch builds and builds and builds. And as it builds, it's tying up the nutrients that they bought. It's creating a barrier of water in some cases to get through. And even if it's not creating a barrier to get through, it holds the water underneath it, keeps the temperatures really hot at the crown. Disease spreads like wildfire. We got all these troubles. We started putting accelerate into the program, sprayed it multiple times per year. Now the thatch is gone. The crop is growing like a rocket. They're using far, far less fertility to grow the same crop. And because the carbon that's in that thatch is being broke down into carbon dioxide on the crown, underneath the grass sucks it up. Guess what the roots do? There's so much extra carbon and sugar and energy, the plant stores it. Where does it store it? In the roots. What is sod? Sod's a root crop. We look at it as grass. We think we're buying the tops. Only the homeowner buys the tops. The grower grows the roots to make sure that the tops survive when it gets put down. It's fascinating when you apply the science in the right direction.
Would you use that on like a crop?
Oh yeah, yeah. Grass, hay, and alfalfa. You can do it on both because alfalfa, even on alfalfa, a lot of the stuff, especially in the year before you're going to turn it, alfalfa has allelopathy. If you get a lot of leaves and stems from alfalfa, that's where the allelopathy, the chemicals that carry over that kind of hurt the germination of the follow crop. Spraying the surface of that year before you take it out to turn it will help that allelopathy go away because it helps break down the chemicals that are in the leaves and the stems. But yeah, definitely in the grass hay too, it's going to make a big difference. So the question we should be asking, we know the soil is designed to feed the plant. If we've never heard it before, now we know the plant is designed to feed the soil. It's sitting out here in certain conditions and just converting sunlight day in and day out the whole time it's alive. How can we help to make the exchange work better, faster, and more efficiently? All the little pieces that we went through here when we said the devil's in the details is what has allowed Summit Gold across the country in many, many multiple markets to be a force in that community to help people change their thoughts and improve. When other people recognize that SummitGold is there, especially if it's local, they'll start coming in with all kinds of biostimulant products. They don't come in there to talk about your soils. They don't come in there to talk about your plants. They don't come in there to talk about balance of nutrition. They're thinking, if these people are open to the whole idea of biostimulants, we're going to come in there and come right in there and have a good old time and sell like crazy because those people are open to biostimulants. They have no program in mind. They have nothing really of any interest other than helping you buy biostimulants. Is there anything inherently wrong with that? Nope, it's a free country. My challenge to you is, when that person comes in, just be bold. Ask him or her, what have you got here? Well, it's a biostimulant. A biostimulant for what? Well, what do you mean? Is it for soil? Is it for plants? Is this a biological product or a biostimulant? Well, what do you mean? Well, a biological product means, by the definitions that the government's setting aside, it has some live biology in it. Is this a biological product? Or is it a biostimulant? How does this work? Because we get the phone calls. I tell them, I said, look, I'm a serious man. I'm a thinking man. I'm not telling you that I wouldn't consider your product. But today, with the information that you have not shared with me, I'm not going to try your product because I don't know what it is and I don't know how it works. I've been looking at biostimulants, some of you now, for many years. I just want to know what it does to make sure I'm not doubling up or that you understand what it's going to do, because if you talk to my consultants, which I'm going to do after you leave here, we're going to find out how it fits. And if it's got its own unique position, then maybe I'm open to it. Other than that, that's called a door. And you're welcome to come back at any time when you have all that information, and we're going to talk seriously. But right now, I got a lot of things to do, and I just appreciate it if you take off. You just got to be bold. And I'm not saying that we have everything that saves the world. There's a lot of different things out here that we get surprised about that people have actually worked on. And it's good. But don't let people buffalo you into saying, I don't know how it works, it just does. And how many times have we heard that? It's 2025. By the simple fact that we don't have that number on a page, but we do have the chemistry and biochemistry to understand stuff, don't get suckered into, I don't know how it works, it just works, and you need to try it. No. Our phones ring off the hook all winter long. Chad's the best. Chad has a list this long. What's this do, Dan? Well, Chad, let's look her up. Even if I don't know, we'll look her up. God bless him. He keeps me sharp. Keeps us all sharp. Some of us he irritates. But he's a great guy. But he's looking for things, and he wants to know how they fit. We should all want to know how stuff fits. Okay? I wish you could see yourselves. It's like...
Yeah. I just wanted to make a comment. You know, we got all these different products, and they'll all fit. We all have issues.
Right.
Different soils. And I've got a customer that's using Engage. And, you know, I don't have a pivot. West of River, we don't have pivots. But you get over here, I asked somebody the other day, I said, is the water all the same over here? No. I mean, the water is totally different.
Right.
So you're starting off with not an even.
Always a unique situation. Yeah. Or normally.
So this guy always struggled with the water going in, you know, you got the sand and you'd think the water would just go in it.
Mm-hmm.
So 2 years now he's using Engage.
Right.
And the first year he says, I had a really good crop this year, but you know, this year he says, I think it was, we had that nice gentle rains. That had to be what it was. So so we know for sure. But for some reason, he's had better crops
Yep.
the last 2 years than he's using this product.
Yep.
But he isn't ready to say it.
Well, again, because when we don't know what we don't know what the dynamics are. What he may have not realized is, if you guys understand soil, sand packs tighter than clay. So if you have soils that are sandy and you've taken good care of them and you've been over them many times, you can get restricted areas underneath that sand that you may not know are there. When you use something like Engage that allows water to move in effectively, water doesn't move effectively out through that restricted zone until the entire restricted zone becomes wet. Then it will fall through. So getting water down into the aquifer is dependent upon allowing that to move. If you put tile in the field, the tile will only move if the surface is not, or the water will only move into the tile if the surface is not sealed. If the surface is sealed, you might get lucky and get a little help, but you're not going to get what you bought for, what you paid for. If the surface seals, it's like putting your thumb over the top of a straw. You put the straw in the water, you put your thumb over it, you pick it out, and the water's still in the straw. Until you open that up a little bit to allow the water to begin to drip or fall out, it's not going anywhere. Same thing happens with tile. If the surface is sealed, the water can't fall out of the profile. So you'll barely do anything. Matter if you don't know what you're doing, you can make it worse if you don't know what you're doing. Gotta be careful. So what I'm saying to him is, after 2 years' time, this whole idea of opening up that soil a little more effectively, if he had restricted air channels somewhere down below the soil that are now gone, now the water that's up here that can move, that can go down to the aquifer, or allow the water to be able to pull out from the pump more effectively, because there's at least a little less resistance, can help you. So it could actually increase the amount of water coming out of the well.
The product going through the pivot is $7 an acre or something like that, $7, $8 an acre. That's kind of chump change for potato people. You know, I don't think that's going to be the.
Let's just use them as a generalization.
Yeah.
Chump change for potato people.
But I mean, these guys are renting different pivots all the time, so they're dealing with a lot of unknown.
Right, right. But is it also chump change for people who grow corn? Because if your center pivots only limited you to so many bushels because your surface is screwed up, it's not chump change either. I mean, it's real dollars. And I think if you begin to look at the system and understand what soil is and what plants are, and is there anything that could be going wrong? So you don't have to just say, hey, Dan, I believe you 100% and go buy it and put it everywhere. You can try it. You can get it in there and try it. I mean, that's the whole idea of this.
If you put trees out there,
right.
There's another reason to use it.
Right. If you want something that needs to move in. Now, if you're on alfalfa and you're putting in Engage and you're using Velpar, that's a no-no, because Velpar is supposed to set right at the top. So you don't want to put Engage or Pervade over Velpar and spray it on the soil, because it moves it right down in the roots, and then the alfalfa is stressed and it can kill it. But other stuff that you want to move into the soil effectively, it moves it in very, very nicely. So you get multiple effects that are beneficial to you. A lot of guys stopped using Bicep years ago because they just couldn't get it to work. And then people started putting it with Engage or Pervade and spraying it out there. And all of a sudden, it's like Bicep works just as nice as it ever did before. Just wasn't getting in the soil effectively. So there's all kinds of things that can be done with that. And again, we don't have time to go into every little thing that every product does. So, if you have a question about could this be possible, please don't think that that's an inappropriate question. We get questions from the very basic beginners all the way to the really complicated stuff all year long, and we don't walk away from the hard questions. That's why we're kind of semi-consultants. We don't charge for consulting. You're buying products from us, and those products are paying the bills. We're not charging for consulting. So, if you ask Tom and he doesn't know, he picks up the phone and calls Jared or Greg, and if they don't know, they'll pick up the phone and call me, or sometimes he just goes around them and calls me. He's gotten a lot bolder since he's been in and out of medical situations.
One clarification, Dan, on the Engage, he said, so we had on that slide Pervade/Engage. Those are the same product, we renamed them. We renamed that product to Engage. Engage RTU is
that's the RTU.
the penetrant without the enzymes in it, so it's less expensive.
Right.
Just so there was no confusion.
Right. No, that's right. I forgot about that. Shame on me. Any other questions? Challenged? Was it worth your time? Isn't it fun to learn about what agronomy really is? It is fun. It doesn't make it any easier. Sometimes it makes it more complicated, but it doesn't take away the fact that the truth cannot be hidden. The truth comes out, and that's what separates out a lot of these programs and ideas. Is if they're based on the truth is built into it, something's gonna happen. Okay.
They have one more question that came up.
Yeah.
Will engage make it through heavy no-till residue to the soil, or will it get tied up or caught up?
Normally, it's going to be able to make it down through there, because what happens is it will seep through the tissue and move down with water effectively. It's going to let water move effectively through everything. So as the water's moving more effectively through that, it's taken it with it. So it will move. Now, you can make the case that not all of it's going to get there, but it's still going to get there to do the work it needs to do.
See, a lot of it actually like treats the water as it's moving down in, so I don't think it's gonna be a problem.
Right. I mean, we've done it many times in different parts of the country, and it's been fine.
You know, Dan, we've all had the issues where I spent pretty much all day yesterday on the phone talking to guys. It was kind of a fun day because I got to talk to a lot of people and they all have a different story to tell, you know. But we've all experienced that. I don't know how the hell that happened. You know?
Pleasantly surprised.
The ones where I fertilized for 170 and I got 210. How the hell did that happen?
Right.
What I asked you this morning, you know, I wanted to, one of the things that we're struggling with up here, and most of us, I think, are, is raising some 50, 60 bushel soybeans, which just don't happen.
Right.
And I've been questioning the fact we're not fertilizing. We've got the guys that double fertilize their corn.
And let the beans have the rest.
Take the rest.
Right.
We're raising our corn up pretty much the minimums. You know, 6, 7 tenths of a pound of nitrogen per bushel. There's nothing left over for the beans.
And that's not necessarily that bad.
But the scenario I talked about this morning, where the guy had a soybean field, he was gonna put it to corn. He spread fertilizer for corn, only got half of it planted. The next year he comes back with beans across the whole thing. He gets to the bean field, he's got 10, 12 bushels more. So it had to be the fertilizer. And I said, is it fertilizer? We always seem to gain bushels if we do beans on beans, for one thing. And then the fact that ground, you know, the question I had this morning is, can ground rest? Because we were talking before, you know, back in the days when we summer followed, we saw green weed out there, we go out and work the whole damn field. Well, you might as well work the summer follow. You know, so you work it, you kill that weed.
Right.
Now you're telling me we gotta plant a cover crop because the growing crop feeds the soil, but the soil doesn't die.
Right. It goes dormant.
Well, it goes dormant in the winter, but that whole summer, that
Right.
biology in that soil, in that soybean stubble was breaking down. Because if it's a soybean corn rotation, there's a tremendous amount of residue.
Right. Right.
So.
It's not like you restricted the water. The soil still got the same rain cycles. Exactly.
So we're assuming that fertilizer did all that.
Right. Right.
And I don't know if that's the case.
And that's very difficult for people to grasp, because it's like they want to believe that, because they can't pin it on everything else. Because again, when we don't know what we don't know, we're making incorrect assumptions. You're right. All of that stuff, bioavailability is taking things that are unavailable to the plant and making them available to the plant. So when we're checking on soil tests, we're checking for the available portion based on what we know in a limited sense on the chemistry and saying, okay, is this available? So, you know, when you see 45 pounds of phosphorus available, that doesn't mean that there's 45 pounds of phosphorus in that soil. There could be 4,500. That's just the available portion of the minerals that are there. So if biology works that system, and you're right, as it's breaking down the old fodder, life and death of microbiology, when those microbes split open, that's where free fertility comes from. They spent all that time making it into themselves, and then when they die, lo and behold, the plants harvest that nutrition from the dead stuff. How many times have you known somebody who hit a raccoon or a possum or a deer beside one of your fields and it lays down there, and then, you know, for the next 2 or 3 or 4 years after the possum's dead, plants are really nice and healthy and green over where the dead possum was. Now, a possum, when it dies and lays on the surface, is not available to a plant. The way it is. But as the possum dies and releases all the stuff that was in the cells and the nutrients and the starch and the carbohydrates and the proteins, blah, 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 plant harvests it, it's all bioavailable. Microbes take things that are unavailable and make them available. So you're correct in the time that system is being able to rest. It's not really resting. We call it resting because there's no crop on it. But that whole system is releasing massive amounts of fertility based on old carbon that was laid down as soybean fodder, now breaking out and releasing the nutrients. Could it have been the fertilizer? Yes. The other thing is, do we know whether fertilizer breaks down fast enough if it's spread in the spring and it melts? We just assume it's all readily available and going into the plant. That's not a given. But after a year, being in a cycle, run through biological cycles, it could be. So the answer could be yes in both situations. But we don't necessarily give the credit just to the fertilizer. And we also know that there are many years where people have not put on potash fertilizer because they just didn't want to. And they go out there, and after so many years of not putting on potash fertilizer, they put on potash fertilizer. And they get a response to it. And they assume that when they got the response, that the response came from the potash. And sometimes that's not true. The other thing that's on potassium chloride is chlorides. And chloride is one of the most leachable elements. You don't know whether it came from the potash or the chloride. I had one guy that had that assumption in his head. He heard that one time, and he's like, I'm going to put out 50 pounds of rock salt, sodium chloride. So he goes out and puts out potash, and he also puts out sodium chloride. And he got a really nice response from the sodium chloride. Better than he did with the potash. Now, the sodium, when it went in there, could also displace the potash. But it also had chloride in it. But now he's in a situation, I still don't know anything. It's hard to figure out some of this stuff. It's not a given.
One of the situations we have up here is after you get done combining beans and corn, we don't have temperature and the time, to spray accelerate and really make it work. Is there a rational way of doing that in the growing crop?
Not in the growing crop. I don't think. Now, the reason being is if you spray accelerate on a growing crop that has not been harvested, it's going to start taking out the dead tissue. So I'm assuming that you're talking about getting it toward the end of the season, getting close to the end of the season.
I think you don't put it on the spring, right?
Yeah.
Oh, talking on spring. I thought you meant at the end of a crop. Oh, so a young growing crop. Yes. Yes. Yep. Right. Yes.
There's a lot of food there.
That's correct. Yeah, my apologies. I made an incorrect assumption. So the answer is yes. And so what you do is when you've got standing fodder and also in your organic matter where you've got many things have been breaking down for the last few years, when you rub that organic matter on your fingers, it's funny how it kind of stains you. And a lot of that can be lignin and cellulose from the former years. So the plant or the microbes that are doing that work, they don't care whether it's massive amounts of cellulose and lignin or micro amounts of cellulose and lignin. Matter of fact, they'd prefer the stuff in the organic matter because it's easier to get to and than to digest. It's the same thing, but it's just like, look at all of it down here. What happens is when that is turned on, that system's turned on, and they begin to break down those bonds, and then everybody else jumps on after they've broken the bonds and they create a buffet, carbon dioxide comes out into the canopy. And I said a while ago, the biggest limiting factor to agricultural production is which element or which compound? Carbon dioxide, total carbon. So the answer is yes, and we have a lot of people doing that, not necessarily to break down the fodder to make it any easier to do anything. They want to harvest the carbon in the season as the crop is growing. So helping soybeans that are, again, challenged because they are a C3 plant, not a C4 plant, C4 being a tropical plant built for intense sunlight all the time and making higher levels of sugars, you're helping that plant make more sugar. And as you release that as carbon dioxide and help that plant, then yield improvements should start to come. So the answer is yes, you can do that.
If it's possible to do that, when you put your free down on.
Yes, yes.
Maybe put.
Very good. Yeah, just be careful. You don't need lots of 28. In that scenario, you don't need probably more than a half a gallon to a gallon. Yeah. And if you got a standing crop, be very careful. Put a little sugar with it, make sure it doesn't burn. Yeah, thus the term pre-emergence.
Hey, Dan, I had Thomas.
You guys don't want to talk to them.
So, one of the takeaways that always fascinates me is the years or rows around instead of V3, length instead of V5. But my question is seed companies have talked in the past about, a fixed or a flex ear. You know, so we've got the determination at V3 and V5. How is that plant flexing?
How is it flexing?
Yeah, that ear is, or is that just a fictitious statement that has been talked about for years?
Oh, no. What we're really talking about there is the plant reads through its kind of computer program of the availability of nutrition and reacts to it. So it doesn't continue to flex as it gets much bigger. It sets a certain size of an ear based on what it sees at a given time. So if the nutrient availability is maximized when it's young, instead of being a limited amount of ear, it will be a bigger ear. It will, instead of being a few rows around, it'll be more rows around. So excess available phosphorus helps it get fatter. Ammonium nitrogen helps it get longer. Okay? And understanding how that connection goes on is critical, especially when we talk about dry fertilizer. Don Huber and Charles Tye did that work back in the 1990s about what causes flexibility to be limited, lengthwise, not so much around this way, but lengthwise. And they were basically laughed at by the entire of the science and fertilizer industry when they released their information. But when the University of Illinois, who had also participated in this laughingstock, did the genome of the corn plant and mapped it entirely, one of the first things they did was recognize that Don Huber and Charles Tye's information was 100% correct, and they offered a public apology to Don Huber and Charles Tye because they were right and the genome proved it. And what happens there is when a corn plant is less than 5 leaves tall, when there's too much potash available, okay, plus corn plants, grass plants in general, suffer from something called luxury consumption. It's like cocaine to humans or meth to humans. If you get on it, it's hard to get off because it's like your body starts craving it. They can't let it go. They'll suck in potash like it's candy, way to their detriment. Because what happens is then, as the plant is growing in its young state, ammonium nitrogen is what actually gives you yield. Nitrate doesn't do it. Nitrate can get around the system, and if you have some nitrate reductase, an enzyme that actually changes ammonium nitrate back into ammonium, you can work it. But the whole point is, if you're loaded up with potash, you can't get ammonium nitrogen in there. What they said is in their research is, in those scenarios, especially racehorse corns, which are the most sensitive because they, in a sense, have a maximum amount of flexibility. Racehorse corns get the most flexibility. What happens is you create a nitrogen deficiency when the corn plant's this tall. Because of the potash toxicity, you have an ammonium deficiency, and what happens is the ear length shortens. That's all predetermined at a very small plant, which is why understanding that nutrients in the right balance of the right things at the right time is those details that we're talking about. This is why you never, ever go in and put 300 or 400 pounds of potash on a corn crop to feed the corn and let the beans have the rest. This is a no-no. Just the opposite on beans. Beans do not show this sensitivity. So if you were going to do a 2-year improvement, you do it before the beans and you let the corn have the rest. And people say, you talk too fast and you're bass backwards, buddy. Prove it to yourself. I've been doing that for 30 plus years, and farmers come up to me all the time and say, I heard you say that 5 or 10 years ago and we tried that. Guess what? Both crops improved. It's all predetermined. So that flexibility, the only thing that would change that flexibility oftentimes is herbicides that are hard on ear production. So you can get beer can ears, beer bottle ears, stuff like that. And you'll notice it's like, well, the ear changed. That's because the physiology shut that thing down and killed part of it. But that corn is not going to continue to be flexible the taller it gets. Those ears don't change in that scenario. They're set right down here. Does that answer your question? Am I following it right? Or is there something else?
I think the question he was asking, does it continue to flex all season long? Your answer
No.
No, flexes it early.
No, it's going to set an ear. It's going to set an ear, and then everything after that's going to be a matter of filling it. Now, it's going to change in its response. When you see it, giving up 3 inches, you'd say, well, it sure didn't flex right. It went the wrong way. That's because we didn't fulfill the need of the things it needed physiologically at that time. But I have seen guys, and here's another one, if you get these ears that are really nice, and then you've got that long, fluffy tip that comes to a point. It's either pink or red, whatever, white, the color of the cob, but it's about that long and it's fluffy and it's little tiny, and you can look at that little tiny tip and you can see where kernels are supposed to be. Not that they ever formed, that there's holes there. It actually set a bigger ear with holes for kernels, but it never filled. It wasn't that they aborted, they're just not there. What that is every one of those tiny holes has an on-off switch. The kernel spot has an on-off switch. It's controlled by a protein called zein, Z-E-I-N, zein protein. Zein protein has to be deposited in every one of those tiny microscopic kernels to turn the switch on. If the zein's not deposited, it can't pollinate. It could have made it potentially, but it don't pollinate. What's the limitation? Zein is a protein that is sulfur dependent. If you don't have enough sulfur, you don't make enough zein. If you don't make enough zein, you can't make kernel switches turn on. And the beauty of that is if you've seen that, a lot of people are like, I did that because the population's wrong. That's just what happened. If you've seen that and you like that variety, throw in extra dry ammonium sulfate at the spring, or thiazole in the 2x2, or extra thiazole up to a point in the starter, because this happens. B1 to B2. Without it then, can't fix it. It's over. That can't go on beyond that. This is all programming for the plant. That's the computer. And if it says, I've got a lot of sulfur, boom, sets an ear and turns all the switches on. Doesn't have enough sulfur, still goes ahead and makes the ear, can't turn the switches on.
You need to come up with like a main switch for all of them, just one, and you've got
Control box.
So if you're wide dropping, is there a point to put thiazole on then?
That's a different scenario. Yes, that's a different scenario, however. But the answer is yes. You use thiazole late as a stabilizer, and also that extra sulfur in the middle of the part of the season makes your nitrogen way more efficient. It will also keep the nitrogen in the ammonium form longer, and ammonium nitrogen is what finishes yield. Nitrate does nothing. If you're buying nitrate, lots and lots of nitrate to go in your wide drop, you're wasting dollars. I mean literally raw, wasting dollars. They're wasted. Because nitrate's going to do nothing for you. Absolutely nothing. So ammonium thiosulfate is a lot, well, this year it's actually less costly than 28 right now. And I have people that are putting in half or 3/4 of their late nitrogen in as thiosulfate. Of course, they're not going unit for unit because it's like, that's a 12,026 compared to a 28 or a 32. And they're sitting there fighting. It's like, hey, that's not enough nitrogen units. Not enough total nitrogen units. Right, it's not enough nitrogen units. But you were counting the nitrate. Yeah, I said you can't count the nitrate. The nitrate does nothing for you. What? So how many units are you on? How many units are you over? And your soil, when it gets wet, releases organic nitrogen as an ammonium form. It also releases some nitrate. So it's not like you're not going to have any nitrate. But if your soil gets wet and you have thiazole stuck in here, and you're cutting back your nitrogen, and your yields get higher, and your test weight gets higher as a result of using the sulfur and doing what we're talking about, what's wrong with this? It's just not enough nitrogen units. Oh, okay. I get it. We're tripping. But that's the reality. I have guys I've told these guys yesterday, last few days, I have people coming to me that we've been talking to for years, and they started this 3 years ago. They'll still stand out there. Of course, we went through that pretty fast. I was telling them that Zig Ziglar used to say, he talked at 4,000 words a minute with Gus up to 5,000. I do the same thing. It's a lot of stuff. But they're saying, I have no idea what you're talking about. Truthfully. He says, I haven't got any idea. But he says, I've been doing this for the last 3 years. We had 2 droughts in the last 3 years. By all definition, I shouldn't have even had half a corn crop. My corn crop is as good or better than it's ever been. My test weight is 2 to 3 pounds higher than it's ever been. I have no idea what you're talking about, but please don't let me go back to what I was doing before. That's exactly how he said it. Please don't let me go back to what I was doing before. And that's on soils that barely make 3% organic matter. What's you guys up here with 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6. We're just over nitrifying. And that's one of the reasons why the Y drops don't work. If it's a lot of 28%, when if you're going to make it like 225 or 250 units of nitrogen, and and you've already got the greatest percentage of that on, and it's a 3 or 4% organic matter soil, each percent releases 30 to 60 pounds per percent of nitrogen. So if you had wet soils at 3%, you're looking at 90 to 180 units. If it rains, those get added. If it rains to rain your thiazole in, but you're already over 350 to 400 units of nitrogen, that Y drop isn't going to do squat. Little reality check. The details. It's the hardest thing in our fertilizer scope to pull back on nitrogen. We can play the game with phosphorus and potash because we don't understand it, but we know if we don't put on nitrogen, somebody's going to see it.
We're about the end of our road. We have one quick question. If you don't know, we'll get back to one. The control duo, is there a max wind speed at which that can be used as a drift reduction?
Control duo is a drift retardant with a surfactant package in it, and we started selling it, and people love it.